I lost my voice for a second. I'm sorry about that. So, greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to an episodic discussion of Resident Evil Outbreak. We will be talking about the entire franchise, talking about, well, at least File 1 and File 2, and maybe some File 3 questions thrown in the mix. I am your host, Renegade Operative, and I would like to introduce my panel. So, first we have Immortal Brando.
Hello, you filthy zombies. I'm ready to blow your brains out with a shotgun, and your brain matters be all over the place.
Next we have Bio Devil Dom.
Hey, how's it going? I can't wait to talk about how my life is shit.
Oh my god, get out.
A bit of a Jim reference to Outbreak File 1. Because he goes like, my life is shit. But
Next
he
we
says it more depressingly in File 2, so.
yeah, I heard they changed the actors as well, but that's a whole nother story. So
we'll get there.
I want to introduce Harold.
Hi. I can't wait to talk about Mr. X.
Next we have Black Shadow.
Yeah, howdy all. Shadow here. I figure probably out of any podcast I ever do about anything on Resident Evil series, this is probably the one I'm most qualified for, having played this for years and literally streamed it for 6 hours just earlier today. So that's a good way to start.
And last but not least, we have our guest here, which is Gothian Games.
Goshen, that's fine. Just Goshen.
Oh, Goshen, okay.
Yeah, I'm the guest. Is that how that works?
Yeah, you're our
We're
first
guests.
Well, I mean,
You're the guest of honor.
You're the guest.
Why am I a guest of honor?
You're the guest that's new, so that makes the most sense because everyone here is acquainted.
Okay, I guess that does make sense.
So we're gonna finally do the document here, and we're gonna start with the first question. So let me see. Let me open this up real quick. I'm professional. Let me open this up. Okay. What is your general experience with Resident Evil Outbreak? How did you stumble across File 1 and File 2? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Well, you, me, I don't mind.
Yeah, I'll go first. So I haven't, the way that I got a hold of File 1 was through Resident Evil Essentials collection. That was a collection that contained Resident Evil 4, Outbreak File 1, and Resident Evil Code Veronica on PS2. At the time, I was very new to RE. My friend, I've seen my friends play RE5, and I played a little bit of it, but I was fucking ass at it at the time. And after that, another friend of mine had shown me RE4, and I had played through that pretty much from start to finish, but I didn't own the game, and that was something that I really wanted to own. And I figured, well, since this little package or whatever came with 2 other games, might as well. Of course, I was not good at Code Veronica, and I'm still not good at Code Veronica. I haven't even beaten it to this day, but Outbreak was kind of an interesting thing because online was just not really a prevalent thing back in the day, on PS2. It was there, but not many people really delved into it as much as they did once the PS3, 360, and so on and so forth had started rolling out. So that's how I got got my hands into File 1. I tried playing it solo, sucked ass. Whatever you do, if you're gonna play Outbreak, just don't play with the AI. Then many years down the line, I got into Outbreak again through the emulator that we recently played on the channel.
Mm-hmm.
So I played both File 1 and 2, and surprisingly, I feel when I played File 1 for the first time, I really didn't give it a fair shake because I was only basing my experience off of offline play. But after playing it through emulation and with friends, it's actually a lot of fun, and it's really interesting to go through trial and error to figure out how to progress through each stage and what's the best characters to use per scenario and stuff like that.
I think it's worth probably giving a huge shout out to all the folks over at obsrv.org, who are all the guys that are responsible for setting up and maintaining all the fan-made servers that runs this game, basically. I think it's worth giving a hell of a shout out because They've been doing it for years. They've gradually had to refine the process, and they do an amazing job. And I let people, even now, get to experience the game for brand new. So, huge shout out to them. I suppose what I'm here was I'll talk about me. I've got to go back to about 2006, I think it was. So I had played plenty of Resident Evil games up to the point. I was a bit behind the curve though in regards to like getting new games, that sort of thing. It was about 2006. I'd sort of had some bit of money. I was doing a couple of little side bits and pieces while I was doing school and whatever else. Wanted to get hold of something brand new, something to get my teeth into, and went down. I think it was Game Station. I think it was before they shut a few years, not too long after that. And went in there, was looking around a few titles on PS2, and I was like, Outbreak. Unusual. I hadn't heard of it before. I sort of looked at it, thought, this is interesting. Asked around sort of the few people I had in my sort of closer gaming circle. They'd all played Resident Evil. None of them have ever heard of it. I was like, well, I'll get hold of this, see what I make of it. I think it's a game where people's mileage vary, especially offline, which is, of course, all that typically people had when the game first came out. Outbreak was one of the games that was very I wouldn't say it was a trendsetter or groundbreaker as such, but it came in that area where online game was very new. This is before sort of like, Xbox sort of Live had already sort of taken off with all the Halo stuff and that sort of thing. This is a little bit before that. It was still very experimental. Getting online set up anywhere was difficult. You needed a variety of cables. In Europe, you couldn't even do it. It was physically impossible. They never. It was only available in the States and Japan. Did the consoles have the software capable of actually doing online play? So all of my stuff was played offline, and yeah, I personally enjoyed it a lot for what it was. I always kind of dreamt of a day where I could eventually play it online, and I thought that'd be great. Never obviously happened. Kind of touch upon it every now and again up until I think it was about 2014, 2015, I believe it was, when I got introduced to the emulator side of things, and then the servers at OBSRV via some folks that I knew. Finally got the opportunity to play the game online. I recorded the series, was absolutely great fun, and I've been playing it online ever since. I still do streams. I'm doing streams at the moment with a randomizer I've made for the game. It's a significantly better game online than it is with the AI. It's not that they're terrible, although they have their moments, but it's not the same. Actual living people as such, sort of playing it alongside, being able to cooperate with them, totally transforms this game. And anyone who ever gets the opportunity to get this set up on an emulator and have a crack with the servers, I think most people would enjoy it. The one downside to it, though, is it's a game that I think it's unfamiliar when you first touch upon it. It's a concept in Resident Evil, but everything's live, and that takes some getting used to. And to be fair, the game can get really hard as well when you go across the harder difficulties as well. So, but that's my experience of it. Like, I don't know how many hours I've sunk into the series lifetime, but it's probably too much.
Yeah, I'm gonna go real quick because my answer is not really that elaborate. I would say that I've played this game because I simply just decided to go back and download the emulator like everyone else, and especially go back to the Outbreak forums and play this via co-op. I played it solo the first time, and it's like Dom said, I was really bad, and I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing or anything of that matter. So playing it with friends was infinitely better, in my opinion. I really did enjoy it from what I played, and I can kind of see where people are coming from, where they really enjoyed the co-op aspect and they would like to see that stuff happen again in future titles because it was so good in this game. And I keep hearing, it was a product of its time and how it could thrive in an online environment like today. So I think Outbreak is just really good for reliving and going back and experiencing that first time where RE decided to take it to the online approach.
I think there's a reason that 15 years later there are people saying, shouldn't have done Resistance, should have done File Free. We'll get into that later on, of course.
Yes.
But there's a reason. There's a definite reason why some people say that, because people. I mean, I look at it and think if the game had come out, say 2009, 2010, when online was actually properly established, like it could have been so far different. Instead, it was what it was.
Yeah.
And was almost a view of what could have been, which of course is one of the greatest teasers in video games.
I also remember seeing. Go ahead.
I was saying, I think it's a good thing it came out the time frame it did though, because if it came out in current year, arguably, debatably, it would have been a much better game because it would have been more polished, though. But it wouldn't have the same cult following as it has today.
It's a good point. Yeah, the argument is that obviously there was then suddenly so many more games around, so it would have been more competition. Yeah, there's a fair argument with that. And ultimately, its mechanics and the way it works is a bit niche. I don't know if that's a fair word to use for it. It's very particular. And even now with say the family online servers, you play online, there are certain bits that still don't work too great, but that's just the way it works. You know, everything has to be run via the Japanese version of the game, so you have to get it translated. Some of the setup for online, you still have to go through some Japanese menus, so you have to follow guides for that sort of thing. So it's still not ideal. But yeah, it's one of those great unknowns. You'll never know, and we will never know. Even if the game was remade for free for like 2022 or whatever, we still would never know as such.
Yeah,
But you know,
even in this day and age, a lot of people are just, the trends change all the time. So back then it was like, yeah, we had a lot of co-op games. Now these days we got like a lot of competitive battle royale types of games. So I think it would be refreshing to see once again, but we'll get into that later. But I just think I remember also seeing Outbreak plastered in Game Informer, because I do remember they had advertisements with the burning sort of bar, and it had, I forget what it's called, but I do remember seeing it, and I think Kevin was standing with another character, and I was like, oh, this is very interesting. Unfortunately,
Talking about when they're like out in like the main like street. This is like in the
it's the first
bar
Outbreak.
scenario.
Yeah, it's the first Outbreak
Yeah,
scenario.
have I think it's like the Raccoon City like theater sign. It's like on the ground and like everything is burning, because that's like at that point in the scenario where you have to set up like a detonator and you have to blow up that whole street because of how much like
Yes.
How many
infection-
zombies are like
yeah.
outside? Yeah, that was the first advertisement I saw, and that kind of interested me as well to get into the game. But back then, I think the only reason I didn't get it was because I was busy with Code Veronica at the time.
Yeah, it was all very, very similar time frame, all of this sort of stuff. And then obviously RE4 came afterwards, and then rest is history, as they say.
Yep. So
I guess I'll go next.
Mhm.
Man, Resident Evil Outbreak was a really weird game for me because when I first had experience with it, I literally had no idea like about Resident Evil as a franchise, as a series.
Wow.
Which yeah, it's really odd because Resident
What
Evil.
approach to start? Wow.
Yeah, it's I actually just happened to be at a friend's house. We were hanging out, and it had to have been like 12, 13, maybe even more years ago now. It was a long time ago, and I happened to be playing on his PS2, which he had just, I guess, been playing Outbreak, and I actually played that game. I think it still had online back then, or something like that. And I seem to remember playing it. It always stuck out to me because it was like there's nothing, there wasn't really anything quite like Outbreak in my mind, and it always stuck out to me. And I never caught the name of the game, and it wasn't until I found out about Resident Evil as a franchise that I really got a chance to sit down and play it myself, like full term. But yeah, no, there really isn't, and there really kind of hasn't been anything like Outbreak in my opinion. And my first impressions of it were, wow, this game's cool, and my impressions of it now are still, wow, this game's cool. It's one that I think, while it has some problems, it has stood the test of time, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's like side bit here, but like with the channel I do, Outbreak's like one of the biggest things that I do on my channel. And it's like, even when I first did it about 5 years ago, the amount of people who knew the Resident Evil series so well, and I started Outbreak, and they're like, I've never heard of this game. So it's fascinating knowing someone that was where they started, and that was their first entry point in the series. It's almost mind boggling to me. It's very impressive.
Yeah,
You're a small community.
Yeah, it's just I guess I'm just really a victim of circumstance, really, because like I, at that time in my life, I didn't really have like a PlayStation system or anything like that. My first Resident Evil game was way like a bit later on, when I played Resident Evil 4 on the GameCube, but my first like Resident Evil game I actually did genuinely play was Outbreak. And so it's kind of weird because I didn't even know that was a Resident Evil game until way later.
All right, I guess I can go. Actually, my experience is very limited, hands-on at least. As I actually did play it on the emulator though, but That was before I wiped all the information on it because I had to do a cleanup and I forgot to put it on. But later I will reinstall everything though. But yeah, my experience was just going through the first two scenarios though. But from at least like from word of mouth though, I think I was watching Survival Horror Network or Carcinogen play the game, and it piqued my interest. After that, I just dabbled into the lore behind it, and yeah, I wish I would got more out of it.
Anyone else on this question before we move on to number 2?
So go.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, so I've been playing Resident Evil since the first one, and a friend of mine, I didn't even know Outbreak released, and a friend of mine, he's like, "Hey, you're a big Resident Evil fan, right?" I'm like, "Yeah," and this was obviously before Resident Evil 4, and like I was playing Resident Evil 3 so much, I got laser disc burns on my Resident Evil 3 copy. So he's like, "Hey, look, this new Resident Evil game came out. You want to borrow it?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Here, this one." And he shows me Outbreak, and I'm like, What is this? I'd never heard of this game." He's like, "It's an online Resident Evil game." I said, "No way. Are you kidding me?" So I go and I play it, but my internet sucked back then. I was on freaking dial-up, so I wasn't able to actually play online. So I was stuck to playing, with the AI and everything. And just as you guys said, that playing with the AI is not really the optimal way to play. So my first experience with Outbreak wasn't really that great, just because going from the original trilogy to, to then Outbreak, it just felt weird. It was a kind of jarring transition. And I hadn't played Code Veronica yet because Code Veronica, it's on the Dreamcast. I didn't have a Dreamcast. So I was kind of in a weird spot with Outbreak when it released, and it like I never actually got the chance to play it online. Even now, I just never got around to even playing the emulator for Outbreak. But it was interesting in the sense that I went from Resident Evil 3, which shows us the Outbreak in the intro for the game, and then me thinking, "Oh, how cool would it be to play a game that takes place during the Outbreak?" Because when you play as Jill in RE3, it's a little bit after the initial Outbreak. So then you have the actual game Outbreak, and it's like, "Oh, wow, this is actually what I wanted." But just the AI, it felt so weird. And like you said, going the transition with the menu system that you're used to in the original games to then go into this one where it's live, it takes a lot getting used to. And I didn't really have a lot of time with the game initially because, again, it belonged to my friend. Now I own both copies, but it's just one of those things where it's like I didn't get to fully experience the game the way it was meant to be played because internet limitations back then. This game was just, it came out too soon, in my opinion. I feel like, even though some of you guys might have said that if it would have come out a little bit later, maybe it wouldn't have been as popular, wouldn't have had a cult following. I think the PS3 era would have been a good era for this type of game. And I would love for them to remake the Outbreak series. And I thought, and I'm sure many people did, that Resistance was going to be Outbreak, but yeah, that didn't happen.
There's no right or wrong answer with that. To be quite honest though, because like it would not be as a cult status today though, but it would be more easily accessible and potentially, debatably more popular if it came on PS3 era, right? So there's really no right or wrong answer in that regard.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm getting at, because I mean, look how many times they've ported out, Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 5. Like if it would have came out on the PS3 era, Xbox 360 era, it could have potentially been ported out to PS4 and PC and all of that.
Or the
reality is, the reality is someone has to go first with these sort of things. Someone has to do something new first, and it was Resident Evil Outbreak. There's other things, with genres and that and stretching out. And it was one of those ones, and it's all thought, yeah, it would be nice if someone else had done it first and got the kinks out. But Outbreak was the game, one of the few games that really kind of tried it first. And as you can see, it was difficult to implement because it was still a very limited feature. So, which goes to show how hard it can be, especially back then, 15 years ago. Completely different to what it is now.
Right.
All right, so we're moving on to question number 2. So, Brandon, can you read that, please?
Indeed, I can. Sorry, I'm talking my fan. It's actually hot. What is your favorite scenario in Resident Evil Outbreak? Oh, actually, I have two scenarios actually. One is actually the Outbreak scenario, the very first one and Foul one, because it reminds me of like a Resident Evil 3, obviously, because it's the Outbreak. It's going shit happens, right? I love that scenario a lot. Just seeing how it begins, then you gotta fight right through all that shenanigans, right? The second one, which is probably a no brainer here to some people, but I love the zoo scenario in Foul 2.
Wild thing.
It's just yeah, because it's so uncanny to see a giant elephant trying to murder you that is mutated from the T virus.
The sad thing is that's not the worst thing in the zoo trying to kill you. That's the
Oh,
problem.
it's
It's
not.
the tigers.
It's the stupid tigers. I
The
hate them.
bees.
The tigers,
aren't
the
great.
the
Actually,
bees,
it was
toucans.
lions. It was
Yeah.
lions.
What's
I
that?
think there's also hyenas in that.
There are some hyenas. You got the alligator.
Yeah.
You know,
There are no
it's
tigers, which that
Yeah.
would have been even more fucked up if we had to.
I
deal
mean,
with tigers
the
and
cute part of that scenario is that there are two different boss fights you can take on, which you can sort of
Yeah.
semi-control, which is a nice touch.
Look, they're in
you
the
know.
same food groups. I fucking hate tigers, lions, whatever. Just as soon as they came out of that truck,
They're big fucking cats.
Oh,
is
you
what
opened
we're
the truck.
gonna say.
Oh, that's you don't.
Yeah,
you
we
don't
did.
go near that truck.
We
You
did
saw
open the
the green herb
truck.
and fell for the trap. Oops.
I don't know who opened it, but they did come out, and I was so
They
scared.
open it themselves whenever you go near. They just open it themselves.
Wow.
The trick is you can go around the outside to get the herb. It's a bit dicey. And if you go too close, you let him out, and it's pretty bad.
Surprise, motherfucker. That's essentially what happened.
Trying to think of my favorite levels, and well, I guess favorite scenarios for me would be I kind of did like Hellfire. Just it had the right amount of like going through rooms and puzzles, and also fighting the boss at the end, which is the thick Regis liquor that you got to
Yeah,
shoot.
It's quite an old school sort of chapter, actually. There's a lot of backwards and forwards, and it's mainly just one big puzzle you're trying to solve, which is kind of very unlike a lot of others. There are puzzles dotted about, but yeah, Hellfire is just one big puzzle and plenty of backtracking, so very old school.
And I also really like the level. I don't know the name, but it's the one where you're in the woods and you have to deal with the X-Men.
That'll be Flashback.
Yeah,
Yes,
Flashback
at the
was
Raccoon
great.
Woods.
It was great because you got the opportunity to see that there's like sort of like a slasher villain after you with an axe, and you gotta try to run around him and also kill the plant at the same time. So I thought it kept you on your toes with a lot to do, especially dealing with him and the rest of the enemies in the environment.
One of the scenarios that has a lot of the scenarios have got sort of like little back plots. Flashback has a huge back plot of what's going on. In fact, the obviously spoilers here, everyone. To be expected. So yeah, Flashback is an old abandoned hospital, and there's a giant plant growing through it. Now it ends up turning out that it was a woman who had come to the hospital and was like infected with the virus or whatever else, and basically kind of mutated. Ended up getting sort of interwoven with all the plant life around, ended up becoming this giant, massive cocoon thing. And it turns out that the Axeman is actually her husband, who thought that he had to keep her alive, and then starts like hunting hikers down, sort of luring him into the hospital, killing him, and effectively feeding him to her. It's then there's all sorts of stuff. Alyssa, who one of the playable characters, like her colleague, went to the place. Kurt went to the hospital earlier in order to do sort of investigate into what was going on. There was police conduct, all sorts of stuff. There's tons of files around, all sorts of information, and that's one thing I like. Again, there's quite a lot of attention to little details in lots of little plots on quite a lot of these. Decisions is another one. End of the Road is another one, which is nice to appreciate, because this is a game that did not have to. They could have just been all about the action going on, but there's a lot of cute plot around. And Flashback's a good example.
I think we're 100% positive that old man in the beginning, he was the axe guy, right? Where you follow him.
Yes. Yeah, that is him. Yeah, Ow. He's the Axeman.
You follow him into the woods, and then all of a sudden, when you're finally inside the abandoned hospital, there he is, just all different.
Yeah, when you get the true ending for Flashback, it shows you everything. That it shows that it is actually him, and it makes you realize that it is actually his wife. But you have to like escape the hospital by killing the boss in the first place, and then you have to take out Axeman while you're on your way out, which is tough because the place is collapsing around you. But if you can do that before getting out, you get the true ending.
Wow, I don't think we ever did that. I think we just left.
Yeah, most people do.
I think
there is
we
also
left and he takes off his mask and just dies in that boss room.
More or less, yeah, more or less. There's also, I'll throw this out. There's actually even a totally different way of leaving the level. You might remember there's a bridge that collapses. When you go to the hospital, the bridge you took to get into the hospital collapses. I don't know if you might remember that or not.
I do remember that, yes.
So if you actually don't cross the bridge, and I've tested this on online mode, on solo you just spend X amount of time. But on online, if someone goes into the hospital, but if there's a people that are still on the other side of the bridge when it collapses, it opens up a completely different event chain of escaping the forest. Like some extra areas become available. There's a woman around who's wounded looking for a daughter. You can help find her. You got to go back to the cabin to find her. She'll give you some weapons, and there's a completely different way of escaping the level. It's really cool. It's hard though. It's very, very tough because all the zombies turn into scissor tails, and there's a bridge with invincible enemies. It's all kinds of ugly, but a lot of people don't know about that. It's very, very cool.
That's very interesting. I don't think we ever done that run before where
No,
people were on the other side before the bridge collapsed.
yeah. Typically, you wouldn't do that. You just go into the hospital, but there is as an alternate way of completing the level if you are still on the bridge for some reason. Very cool.
But to bring it back to favorite scenarios, anyone else want to go?
I'll go.
Good.
In regards to favorite scenarios for me, it is honestly flashback. I think I don't know, it's very unique with the Axeman and all that. I think, and I also just kind of like the like general like look of the level. Like it has this really, I don't know, doesn't it have like that overgrown kind of look to it inside the building, if I'm not mistaken, or am I misthinking? Because
Kind of does, yeah, because it's decrepit. It's been abandoned for like
yeah,
a while, and the forest is kind of like taken over a little bit, and obviously all the plant stuff going on as well. So
yeah. I kind of dig the look of that, and that on top of the Axeman and all, it just kind of all comes together to just. It's the most. It feels like one of the most unique scenarios.
yeah,
In
it's
that
almost
game.
like a bit of Silent Hill in it almost with kind of
Yeah.
the aesthetic.
Yeah, exactly. And I dig it. I dig it quite a lot. It's very different for Resident Evil, kind of, it feels almost. It's neat. I like it.
Really quick, there's a bit of a fun fact about Flashback in particular. A lot of the like enemy designs and some of the concepts for that stage were pulled from a cut Resident Evil game that never saw the light of day. That game was supposed to be called Biohazard Dash or Resident Evil Dash, where you were supposed to be playing a new set of characters going back into the Spencer Mansion after it blew up to find like new rooms and stuff like that, and mostly dealing with enemies that have like plant-like vines and stuff like that. So that was cut, and it was in favor. It was because they had more favor for Resident Evil 2 at the time. So, but
I was gonna say, wasn't that a concept for Resident Evil 2 at one
yeah,
point?
well, it was the concept game before Resident Evil 2 was like conceptualized because they were thinking of doing that before they decided let's just go straight into like Resident Evil 2 and make that.
I mean, given how Dead Rising 4 kind of came out, I guess that's further proof that good thing they didn't do that.
I'm curious, Black, what do you mean by that for the Dead Rising sort of
Well,
comparison?
Dead Rising 4 came out, and obviously you go back to the Willamette Mall. And I know the game was not particularly well received for a variety of reasons. So maybe I don't know. Going back to a mansion that exploded, I don't know. I can see why it would have been cut. I'm not sure what would have made of that. The plot seems a bit crazy because when you blow up a place, like it was a pretty big bang.
Oh
So,
yeah, so basically plot inconsistency.
Yeah,
the more I'll deal with is to go like explore what's remained there, and then you run
Mhm.
into these weird, village idiots in the woods. That
Oh,
would
I
probably
see, okay.
make more sense than
That's-
going back inside the thing.
That's kind of the idea that they had. Was that like parts of the actual structure were still intact, and it would reveal rooms that like weren't there because they were hidden by like some kind of wall or like some kind of
Jeez.
thing that was like there when it was still intact.
I can see. Yeah, I can see why they went with Resident Evil 2. Probably an easier
Yeah.
concept to work with.
So like the idea is cool, and it's good to see that was like obviously implemented into Outbreak with Flashback. But obviously, like it's clear that there were inconsistencies.
as there always is.
Yeah, that makes sense. But anyone else want to go on this?
I'll go really quick.
All right.
So I'm gonna kind of follow what everybody else said. Flashback is absolutely one of my favorite scenarios. I really like the soundtrack to that stage. Like right when you first start up that stage and you're just in the cabin, like going through the woods and stuff. It just really like atmospheric. Like it's very different from some of the other stages in File 2. Also, a bit of a hot take. I think that particular stage is just better than Resident Evil 7 in its entirety. But I digress.
Oof. I don't know. I've not played it yet, but that's a big statement.
Oh, you're not missing much.
I'll
But,
find out
Oh,
very soon.
oh, whoa! Don't tell him that.
Yeah,
It-
I'm
it-
going through it in about
uh,
a month, so in preparation for 8. So
Yeah.
going in good time.
But as far as File 1 goes, I actually like. I think it was called Decisions, the final stage.
Yes.
And the only reason why I like that stage is because we fucked up so many times with it. It's brought out some very funny ass moments in our playthrough.
Is that the one with the black tyrant?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes, Thanatos.
We fucked that
Thanatos.
stage up so much. Like Ren could tell you because he was there, but
Ye-
like we fucked that stage up so much that
It's a tough
I
stage.
only liked
It's a tough
that
stage.
just because we fucked it up so much.
It's really hard. They really just pour in the fact that you have a lot of objectives to do in that stage, and it really got like overwhelming at points. But it was hilarious because I don't think anyone was suspecting Thanatos to burst out of the window and try to kill us, but he did.
Yeah, no, it's a tough stage. It's very long. Like if you know sort of what you're doing, you can split up to kind of make things easier. And of course, if you don't realize that when you go to unlock the doors, you can turn on the daylight reagents again, so you can cure yourselves. Then that makes the end a lot harder than it ought to be. But that's the way it goes.
I feel
sometimes.
so dumb for not noticing that. I really
Yeah.
do.
I think it's also interesting as well because it all revolves around there's kind of a sort of semi-plot going on with Greg, who's the guy who's in charge of Thanatos, who fascinates me because I wonder what does it take for Umbrella, who are crazy and delving into all kinds of inhumane experiments. How bad do you have to be exiled by Umbrella, who you've got to do some pretty bad shit for them to not want anything to do with you.
And also to not fucking kill you and steal your research.
Which is obviously what happened to Peter Jenkins. He got assassinated because obviously the daylight research and all sorts of stuff going on. There's a lot of fancy plot going on. And Thanatos himself he's a cool sort of boss as well. He's got some good stuff. He's not fun to fight. Online, he's not easy because he kind of goes a bit all over the place unless you're the room host, which makes fighting him kind of difficult. But it's a good stage, if long.
What was I gonna say? Like, as far as like that stage goes, like it is just balls to the wall, like ridiculous because you like you mentioned, like when you get to that final fight, he's like jumping all over the fucking place, and it's like that stuff makes it crazy. But I think it's a good challenge compared to the final boss fight in File 2. I don't know. I kind of prefer it over the File 2 boss fight.
Nixie. Yeah, I think you're probably right. Nix. If you don't know how to fight him particularly well, he's brutal. Do agree.
Or we could just like escape on what was it? I think it was the armored tank that was in the back because apparently you don't even have to fight Nyx. That's something we discovered like after the fact.
You can totally avoid that, yeah. If you make your way around and get onto the chopper that Rodriguez is piloting, you can just take that out of there. If you're super quick, you can get Linda out of there too. Although it's really hard to do that. It's a lot of ground to cover, and you have to fight Tyrant R along the way, and he hits really hard. So you can definitely do that. But yeah, a lot of people end up fighting Nyx, which is a tough fight because he's super tanky, and you have to learn how to kind of fight him correctly. Otherwise, he just has infinite health. It's a real pain in the ass, and he hits you, and your virus gauge goes nuts. We'll talk about that later, I'm sure.
Also, plot twist, we did not save the girl, so she definitely died on our playthrough.
Yeah, you need to save her for the good ending, because of course she, as far as the party knows, is the only way of knowing. Because in this run, decisions never happen, so she's got the only cure to the virus that's known. So that's all that sort of plot going on there.
Yeah, I figured as much. I figured that would happen. They would pull Oh, you got to do this to get the best ending.
Yeah. I suppose I was it was me. Desperate Times is definitely a community favorite. The stage at the RPD. I think I like it for different reasons other than others. It's not an easy stage at all. But I think obviously going back to the RPD, kind of, and going the events before anyone got there, before Leon and Claire get there, before Jill gets there, before Marvin gets wounded, is all kinds of really cool. Sort of the aesthetic and like the music of the level is really really awesome. And it has a great finale as well with the standoff against the zombies, which is one of the toughest finales in the game. On very hard. It is you got to chop through like 50 zombies, and they're all tanky as hell. It is a really really tough scenario, but it's one of the most played in the community, and it's a lot of fun personally. Far One Decisions is a great one. Below Freezing Point's fun. Going again, bit nostalgia, being back at the Umbrella Labs. The Hive at the Spencer Memorial Hospital was also pretty tough. If you're not used to it, there's a lot of good stages. There's some. It comes down to a lot of personal preference, though. Some people kind of like more actiony ones. Some people aren't really fans of sort of more puzzly ones. So there's a lot of personal preference in them. But there's some really really good stages.
Yep, I agree. Anyone else want to go on this? Going once, going twice. Sold to the hooker in red. All right, so we're gonna move on to question number 3. What is your least favorite scenario in Outbreak? So the flip side.
Yeah, going from what I said. From my experience, and people I know, Hellfire from the group I know is not particularly well liked because they just don't like the idea of this giant puzzle area. It also sucks online. There is a room of death, which if you go into, it just starts disconnecting people, so you have to learn not to go in there. It's the only room that does it in the entire game. Some people I know aren't a big fan of it. It can get a bit repetitive as well if you're just doing it again and again. There's not a lot of variety, which is something that Outbreak needs. Underbelly as well for File 2, which take place in the subway. A lot of people aren't a big fan of that I know of. They feel it's a bit dull. And it is a bit of backwards and forwards again. It kind of depends what you want in the game. There's a lot of backwards and forwards, up some just lots of kind of bland corridors, which makes sense. You're in a subway; it's not going to be fancy. Although it does have alternate exits, which is pretty cool. But I'd probably venture those two if I had to put them in. But I'm not saying I hate them.
It's like, okay, I'm thinking on that level, and I really dislike it. And I think it was mostly due to the ticks and them being super annoying, and
Yes.
we had to deal with them throughout the entire run when they got in the subways. So that run was very bad for us, and it's the one that I think we failed the most. I think we failed it like 3 times before we finally got it. Another stage I really don't like is, once again, I'm gonna say decisions, because it's just so much to do. I feel like it could have been paced out better, and some things could have been less cryptic. Otherwise, it's an enjoyable romp for what it is, but it's not my most liked stage because of how long it is.
Yeah. It's probably, I think the problem with it is it's quite a change from everything beforehand. It's not like a bit of a step up and a bit longer. It's like twice as long as most of the other stages in the game, especially if you've not used to it and you're all just taking the same paths and kind of working things out. Like, yeah, it's a lot to do. It's pretty unforgiving. And then there's a lot of things that you can miss to like make your life easier as well. So that is its downside. But once you learn the map a bit, I think it's pretty good. But it's getting over that hill, I think, is the problem with that one.
Yep. Anyone else? Least favorite Outbreak stage? File 1, File 2.
I wouldn't consider it a stage, just more like enemy. I hate that blob of leeches or whatever it was. They were just annoying to me.
Oh, you're talking about the
Leech
hospital.
Man?
Yeah, the hospital. Yeah, the Leech Man. Basically, I look at him as like a predecessor to what they made in Resident Evil 0. But just like I just hated dealing with that, especially being by yourself, not playing online, and seeing that thing pop up. One, I loved it at the same time as much as I hated it, because it was like it made it tense to run into that, especially when you're low on ammo and like you just have to just run from it. I hated that. But I loved it. It's weird. I have a love-hate relationship with the leeches.
It's
I guess
funny.
that
Go ahead.
Also stemmed into Resident Evil 0, but go on.
Yeah, it's funny because that level, I think we needed a guide to figure out what the hell was going on, because apparently you need the blood pack in order to lure it, and then you have to burn it as well, and that sort of stops it for a while. So.
Yes, the temperature room. You don't have to use it, but a blood pack makes life significantly easier. But yeah, you got to lure it in and then come out and then superheat the room in order to kill the leeches, because that's their one vulnerability is fire.
Mm.
The hardest bit I had problems with that, and it got stuck for a long time, was actually even getting to that point, is working out the codes for the elevator, which are really obscure. There's like a Carmine code you have to find, and you have to add that to like a modifier between different files in the game. The problem is that the file said add this to like the red code. I had no idea that Carmine was red. I had no idea, so obviously I had no idea how to solve the puzzle. The other issue is I always found was actually the code to the rooftop. It's always the same, 0930. But the only way to find out even what the code could be is by looking at a desk in the first floor doctor's station, which is infested with enemies. You just look at a random desk and it says, like, someone's daughter's birthday, September 9th, or September 30th, or something like that. And it's like, that's the code to the rooftop. It's really obscure. I think they could have done a better job with the puzzles. I think they were pretty obscure, especially compared to some other puzzles in the game. And Leech Man is pretty tough as well. He can like corner you and just rinse you. Pretty brutal.
Anyone else on this question?
No, I got nothing to add on this.
Harold?
Yeah. Honestly, my least favorite scenario in Outbreak, is Desperate Times. It's
Wow.
kind of weird though, because like I don't necessarily think it's not like bad. It's not a bad scenario. I don't think there wasn't any real scenarios that I felt were like bad, like, oh god awful, god I never want to touch these again. But Desperate Times was like one of those ones where it's like, yeah, it was kind of cool seeing the RPD again, but also that ending sequence. I know it's like purposely super hard, but it kind of felt like, I remember when we played it, there were several times we'd get to the end and then we would just proceed to die, and it was like a consistent thing. We tried like 3 or 4 times at one point during the night, and it's just that ending sequence just doesn't feel right to me.
It is deceptively hard. I do agree.
Yeah. It's like it's the worst part to me, and I mean it comes off at the end of what is otherwise an actually pretty all right scenario. I think I like going all over the RPD, and I like when you split your party, I guess, and it is a really cool scenario. It's just that ending sequence is what sinks the ship for me.
Yeah, I think at that point, the only way we beat it was we had to coordinate and get enough ammo before we trigger Marvin outside. That was the only way to beat it. And there was also the fact that there was poison in RPD, so we had to hurry up and get out, otherwise we would drain our health, and that would be a problem.
Nerve gas. The nerve gas is pretty annoying. That circulates kind of weirdly, and it's kind of weird because it goes into a room and it takes ages in a room. It goes via a particular cycle. In an ironic sort of way, the gas is probably easy to deal with on hard difficulties because it cycles faster. On like very hard, it cycles through a room like every 30 seconds. Now, in theory, that makes it more annoying because it means it's more over the place. But in a way, it actually makes it easier because it's cycling pretty quickly. That if it's in a room you need to get past, it doesn't take long to actually wait for it to go past and go to the next room. Whereas like on hard, for example, it will sit in the same room for like 2 minutes. So if you've got to get past and you've got nothing to do with like to protect yourself from taking in massive virus rate problems, then you're just kind of stuck spending a lot of time. The finale is also pretty deceptive as well. Yeah, if you don't know it's coming, like the first time, you're not ready for it, and it's pretty brutal. But yeah, once you realize how it works, and it's just about stacking up all your weaponry in the yard, and just saving all the items spawn, switch everything out, and just getting yourself ready for the fight. It's not too bad. But yeah, first couple of times, it's like it takes you by surprise, and you tend to just get munched, which is the nature of it, unfortunately.
It's not the worst scenario in my opinion, but it definitely can be brutal at the end, which I agree with. All right, anyone else before we move on?
This is worst stages.
Yes.
The Hive. I fucking hate that stage.
I'm trying to think. The Hive. Which one was that?
It's Spencer. It's the hospital. Spencer Memorial.
With the fucking leech zombies.
With the leeches.
Yeah, that's the only one I really hate, to be honest.
You didn't hate the subway?
Oh, fuck the sub. Yeah, with the fuck that shit.
I think if you don't like the Hive, you probably don't like the subway. Yeah,
Yeah, you're right.
they're
'Cause-
all sort of similar in that respect.
The ticks were brutal, and I think we just had that point where everyone almost made it to the end, and then we just died. So I'm pretty sure we had to do that one over. But I guess we can move on to the next question. So question number 4, Dom, you want to read that?
Yeah, sure. So this is number 4. Did you experience online RE Outbreak? If so, what is your experience with 3 other players? So, like I said earlier, I didn't experience it until I played via emulation. And honestly, I feel like that's really the way that the developers intended for people to play, was with live players as opposed to the AI. Because it's more accurate and it's a more enjoyable experience.
Yeah, it completely changes the way the game plays, especially on File 2. File 2, I think it's more relevant. File 1 is a game where if you're playing solo, you can kind of get away with a lot more. Because the problem you have with the AI is that as yourself, you can do all the abilities that your character archetype has, but the AI never does that. Now, in File 1, it doesn't matter too much, but in File 2, there's lots of things that different characters can do in different kinds of maps, from pushing heavy objects to unlocking doors or this, that, the other. So you get penalized a lot more for that in File 2. It's much more designed for playing with actual online players who can do this rather than the AI. So it's definitely a lot more punishing in that respect. And it's just the way to play the game. It's a completely different experience. Online also, I think another thing that's nice about online is that it actually randomizes a lot more about the game. There's a lot of different randomized item sets, especially on File 2, and it will switch around where different items can be found. Even some key items also get circulated around as well, which is something that doesn't happen on solo. It's dependent on your difficulty that you're playing. So you kind of get used to it after a while, whereas online it's always, you don't know if you're going to be running somewhere and getting like a handgun or maybe like a stick. There might be nothing at all, which is refreshing.
I think I only played this through emulation, so unfortunately I couldn't play it back then during the broadband era. But I really did like it for the most part. I tried Lone Wolf as well, and once again, it was okay. It's not the worst thing in the world to me, but I do prefer playing it with co-op. That being said, I really did enjoy the experience, just people roaming around, stuff like that. The only issues that I saw, and I don't know how prevalent this was for other people all the way back then when they could play online, was there was some lag with the zombies. Like, there are some times where you shoot them and then they sort of like jitter a little
Yes.
bit and then they fall on the ground, and I thought that was weird.
Yeah, there's a bit of feedback. It's because ultimately these servers are based upon the hosts. It's effectively a local server on the host side. Hence why I sort of run master things. Generally it's not too noticeable, although when there's a lot of stuff going on, for example, like the Desperate Times siege, it's very noticeable and can be difficult. Thanatos especially, he goes all over the joint because of the lag. It is an issue. It's something that they've made as good as they can, but without like official dedicated servers, that they can't really make it any better than what it is. But yeah, it's a bit of a pain. It's something you have to kind of just get used to when you're playing certain areas, and know you have to be kind of thinking a little bit ahead of the game. What you're seeing might be half a second behind or a second behind. So especially if you make difficult things, like if you're like trying to swing melee weapons, for example, at enemies, the fact you've got to think, right, I need to swing earlier than I actually intend to make sure that it hits, because that can be super frustrating.
Yep, I've noticed that when I got cornered by like 2 zombies and they managed to grab me even though the hit did count. So I thought that was
Yes.
like super weird.
Yeah, it does that sometimes. It's an unavoidable part of the game. The fact that it's fan made servers of a game that's 15 years old. They've done the best that they can. But outside of like official servers, which they obviously can't do, I don't think it's ever going to improve much upon what it is. So it's just a part of the game you have to just get adjusted to. If you're like on your own, it's not so bad. And obviously, one person in each room is the host of the actual room itself, so they see everything correctly. So when there's a lot of stuff going on, sometimes they just got to sort of feedback information as to what is going on where, because the players can't always tell what's happening, which is a shame, but
Anyone else want to go on this?
Sure. I'm down. I actually did get a chance to experience Outbreak briefly during the era that it was actually like online, like before the servers shuttered and all of that, and that was back when I originally played Outbreak before I even knew it was Outbreak. And even like today, I still playing with 3 other people in like a Resident Evil game that's reminiscent of like the classics is just it's nice. I think it's fun. I think it's. I mean, it has some issues here and there. Every game has issues, but it's fun. I loved it. And back in the, I will say though, I almost feel like emulation online is almost a little bit more stable than like old online. Because like at least with like old online, the problem is like the internet infrastructure back then was kind of and
it was what it was. It was experimental, for like a better way of putting it.
Yeah, that's a better way of putting it. And so like now with emulation and everybody has like better online, it almost to some extent feels better than it did back in its heyday. And so I mean, obviously there is some issues because of emulation and all the way they had to do the online, and it is fan made online and all of that. So I mean, even with those issues aside, I think emulation online was the better of the two, like from the old day and now like the present. I think it's better.
All right, so moving on. Is everyone else good with this before we move on to the next question?
Yeah. Only other thing I would throw out, just on the side, I'm aware of it. There is also a separate piece of software available for the game. It's called a status tracker. Obviously, one of the issues of the game, a little bit obviously if you're all separated out, is you don't necessarily know what's going on. There is some separate software you can get for the game. It's like a little side window, which actually you can run alongside like your emulated version of the game, which actually will track everyone's health and their inventory as you're going along, which is pretty cool. It's on OBSRV. Outbreak status tracker. If anyone's interested in having a look at, they're going to play the game. Do have a go. There's 2 different versions of it. And it's nice to have. It's a nice little tooltip, and it's great for streams, as it turns out, so people can see what the hell's going on.
All right, so we're gonna move on to question number 5. So, who is your favorite character to play as due to their abilities or feats?
Oh, that's easy. Freaking Kevin. That crit shot is just a monster.
Kevin is a big pop. I think as well, especially with most people's having to play the game solo, especially in the early days.
He's definitely the best one to have.
Kevin is the single like most capable character on his own.
He can kick and then do a crit shot. Like he's well rounded.
He was the fastest character in the game. He's now technically tied fastest. So he's the fastest. He's got the crit hits. He can kick stun. He's fairly tanky health wise. His 45 he's got, which is obviously a really nice weapon. Statistically, he's one of the best characters in the game. There's little question about it.
He's one in army when used right.
I think also just like his personality as well, sort of a bit happy-go-lucky, sort of a bit kind of sort of just jollying on in a way. I think is very appreciable as well. That appeals to me. And the fact he's kind of his side story, the fact he applied for stars, failed twice, unfortunately. But makes you think, I think he's definitely probably my favorite character to play. Out of the main characters.
If he fell stars and he's this good as he currently is, then that makes the star guys. Yeah, they're really good.
Isn't it canon that he and Leon are friends?
No,
he will be partners. They're supposed to be assigned partners, but due to the outbreak, obviously that didn't happen.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Because obviously they never met because Leon never got to the station, so. I take it they never met, but yeah, it makes sense that they would have been sort of like on similar teams. And to be honest, I can easily see them as like a sort of a partnership. Makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, 2 alcoholics, being policemen.
I wouldn't call Kevin an alcoholic. He just, likes relaxing with a beer in his hand. There's a difference.
He's an alcoholic.
Yeah, he runs up tabs at bars, which he tends not to pay. That is immediately a problem.
I was gonna say Kevin too, just because he's the easiest character to pick up, especially for a newcomer, and his ties to the overall lore, like you just said, he was supposed to be Leon's partner, and the way that Kevin's backstory, like he holds Marvin in a high regard, and like he has respect for his peers. He feels more like a seasoned version of Leon to how Leon eventually becomes. That's,
To be
that's how I
What could
feel.
have been? What could have been?
To be quite honest though, he could have been the Leon status quo if Leon was not developed. Because no, he does have potential though, like hold his own, like a little game or whatever, if he was given a chance to, like for RE2. But clearly, no, that didn't happen.
I think part of the appeal as well, I think, of the game is the fact that you are taking on part of all these characters that they're not. These people aren't special forces. They aren't, military professionals. They aren't anything like that. These are just regular people with regular jobs and regular lives that have just been caught up in this absolute catastrophe. And having to kind of, people have got specialities and they've got things they're good at. But, the whole idea of people trying to have to band together to actually survive the circumstances around them. I think it in itself is just a very nice touch, and it's a nice own selling point. And they're all very strong. Mark, the security guard, starts with his handgun as well. He's very tanky. Jim, as was mentioned earlier, with his coin, he can flip, he can dodge enemies fairly decently. David can fix stuff. There's a lots of little. Everyone's got their own little niche and abilities, and it's combined those up. I think it's really really nice.
I want to. I want to say like the characters kind of contrast for me, anyways. The characters from Dawn of the Dead, like it reminds me of that type of situation where you have just these random characters, these random civilians that they're not trained, like you said, except maybe a handful of them might have some sort of training. Like you have Kevin, who is part of the RPD. You have one of the other characters. I'm drawing a blank. The big dude who he was a vet.
Mark, the security.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a former Vietnam vet. Yes.
Right. So you have a handful of them, maybe a couple of them who have some sort of training, and the other ones they're just regular civilians. So you have those characters that kind of step up to the plate to kind of lead everybody. And I feel like that kind of makes me think of Dawn of the Dead a lot, and probably why I do like Outbreak in regards to that, because I love Dawn of the Dead.
It's kind of it's a very very old school character archetype thing as well. You've got your damage dealers, you've got your tanks, you've got your healers, you've got your utility guys. And it's all sort of mechanisms that are still used in games today. And here we are 15 years ago at a game that was really experimenting that with a multiplayer online sort of arena, and it was one of the first to ever do it.
Okay, real quick, I need to interject with something. Who's your guys' least favorite character to play as, or in general,
I don't think I was ever that great with Cindy, because
Yes.
I'm just not a healer person, in my opinion. I like to go on my own and experiment and explore, and I'm just really not good at that class. So I would have to say I'm terrible at that, just because I would rather be like a character that fights. So I prefer Kevin over Cindy, to be honest.
The irony of that is there's some people I know who would scoff at that because she has a dodge which can dodge pretty much any attack in the entire game.
Was she Joe Valentine?
Not quite. She ducks down and prays, but the way it works is animation. It can dodge pretty much any attack in the entire game. Grabs, swipes, swings, some insta-death attacks she can even dodge. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, obviously it is a very sort of an auxiliary character ultimately.
Mine
it's not
would
everyone's favorite.
probably be Yoko from a competitive standpoint, because I know she has her advantages at certain levels, like the Raccoon City, not Raccoon, Umbrella facility, because she's an employee there, and I think she's also the medic healer or whatever. Type.
She has her item, her backpack, so she actually has the extra vending space.
She's basically the pack mule.
Yeah.
Pack
To be fair
mule.
though, that's something that people appreciate. When you're used to playing these Resident Evil games of like 8 inventory spaces, 10 inventory spaces, more than that, when you start playing Outbreak and you have 4, that's really jarring for a lot of people to get used to. And Yoko, at least you have the 8 spaces. So if you're
And-
not used to it, like being able to carry stuff with you is very useful.
In the case of at least Outbreak, though, you do have like up to 4 characters, right, with you. So technically, you have more than normal for
In
some.
theory, yes, but the problem
But-
is if you're playing with the AI and they choose not to follow you, then you're kind of
Exactly.
on your own. That's a problem. Obviously, if you're online, it's a lot different. You could kind of
At-
obviously shuffle things around as necessary. But
We actually discussed this last time we were talking about Outbreak. We said like the characters should have at least 6 on them by
Well,
like minimum 6
I mean,
item boxes.
the thing is that then it's like the fact that it's 4 kind of means you are forced to rely upon your allies a bit, which is kind of the point of the game, isn't it? If everyone had 6 inventory space, you could have a weapon, ammo, health, and just tons of space to put all sorts of things. You know, again,
I
these
think,
aren't professionals. These are regular people in just
I think
shirts
the
and
point
trousers.
that
all
he's
the time.
trying to make though is that like
From a gameplay, yes. Sorry.
like from a gameplay standpoint, it's flawed because of the fact that like if you're playing solo, if you're playing through the offline, you're kind of just at the mercy of the game. Because if the AI fucks off and you don't know where they went to, that's 4 inventory spaces you can't utilize. That's
Exactly.
4 potential items that you cannot utilize at that point. And granted,
Yeah.
if the character like if any of the characters die in a room, that becomes like a permanent like item slot box in that room, so you can swap items in and out as needed. I think they as soon as they die, they get an additional 4 spaces, but only when they die.
Yes.
But even then, it's like, it would be more ideal, at least for solo play, where you get 6 slots, or at least the potential of finding, say, like a side pack during the scenarios to mitigate that issue.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's another example of how the game was obviously tailored to multiplayer play and online play, and perhaps came up a little bit short on solo. It's a fair point.
So what about least favorites, Dom?
I actually have not gone through this question really quick, so because I just came back. I just wanted to say that as far as like my favorites go, probably I'm probably gonna say not Cindy, Alyssa, David, and Kevin. Alyssa specifically because she has the lock picks, so like she's able to unlock certain like lockers and doors that might have been locked otherwise, leading you to some like extra items and other like pathways that you could potentially take. For David specifically, just because you could just throw a wrench and while it's not as broken as what Ren was doing in his 007 Everything or Nothing playthrough, that shit is great. Like having a fucking throwable defensive item that no other character has is very fucking useful.
The monkey wrenches are really good. Really good. You get 12 as well. That's a lot.
Yeah, and and you can also kind of craft spears and stuff for the characters too to use. So like, it's also another thing that no other character is able to do.
Which is really nice on high difficulties, because of course you end up on very hard. You almost don't have any firearms at all, so you're used to just using sticks and stones and having to combine stuff. So David, in very hard gameplay, is really really nice.
Yeah, and then I think I said Kevin, right? So like
You did.
Kevin I like just because of the fact that he's the only character that uses a 45. So
What about least favorites, Dom?
least favorites, way back when I would have said Jim, only because I had to deal with his AI. And playing Outbreak File 1 on the Hive with Jim's AI, the only thing you hear constantly being spammed is, my life is shit. My life is shit. So it's like, I would have said Jim. But that shit actually ends up becoming funny when you have like somebody doing it like in like actual multiplayer. So it's a completely different thing because like at least you know what you're doing and it's like you have your teammates and you're able to communicate and whatnot. But with AI, that shit's just annoying. I think least favorite probably and definitely is the doctor. I just don't play as him as much.
George?
He's like the only other he's like the only other healing character.
I think
he's again another one. Is one of those characters that on higher end difficulties he's kind of useful with his medical kit. But like my issue with George is that there's you got all these side characters and so many of them are George types. That is kind of frustrating and it's a bit bland to me as well. His dodge tackle is pretty good though, but I would probably agree with George there.
Like I don't know, like because like George, Outbreak kind of has the same thing that like Operation Raccoon City has. Like this is kind of a weird comparison, but like kind of bear with me here on this one. Like Operation Raccoon City has a virologist and a medic on like that game's like set of characters, and both of them for the most part kind of have similar abilities, and that's kind of the same deal going into like Outbreak, where you have Cindy and you have George, and both of them more or less do the same thing, except for George has like specific abilities to cure like poison and mitigate like the virus like percentage. So that's really where like he stands out in particular. So like I don't know, like I just don't feel like I don't feel like they made him stand out as much as like say Cindy by comparison.
Yeah, I mean the fact that Cindy starts off with just tons of health in a case is pretty nice. The whole idea, obviously, with George is that you can convert the herbs you get into pills, which can do different things. He can do a lot of cool stuff. To be fair, can George? You know, if you're on levels, for example, where there's nothing that can poison you, then you got loads of blue herbs you can just take and convert into recovery medicines, which heal for more than green herbs actually do in the first place. And then you can convert those into antidotes to do with poison. You can combine mixed herbs as well into literal antivirus pills as well, which can be really, really useful, especially if you're sort of getting towards the back end of a level and you're not in a good state. That can be pretty big. But yeah, I think I probably agree. I think I prefer Cindy on a. It's close. But yeah, it's just so gosh darn many Georges is my problem. I would have said Jim to begin with as well. It's probably not, like was my least favorite, but it's just a case of getting used to how he works and understanding that he can do a ton of damage because you can flip a coin to increase his crit rate chance, his chance to crit hit, and he can do a gobs of damage and stunning and all sorts when you get it high. But if you're not used to using him, he takes a lot of damage. His virus rate is unbelievably quick as well, so he's a bit glass cannony, but he can be really, really nice if played well.
Did anyone bring up the fact that there was, well, at least from what I gather, there was multiple characters that you could play with via Game Shark, and also in the emulator version of Outbreak, like Honk,
Yeah,
Miguel.
solo. Yeah,
Yeah.
there are, I believe, in total 123 different characters in Outbreak File 2. About 30 of those are either the main characters or costume versions of the main characters. All the rest are all sorts of characters, from NPCs, from like the police station, civilians, doctors, nurses, scientists, military people, sub characters from various areas. There's absolutely god's loads. It's kind of crazy how many there is, and they all have their own individual stats. They've all got their own individual sort of that are varied from the main character, their own starting items. You've got stick men, for goodness sakes.
Oh yeah, I've seen those before. Stickman,
yeah,
Mr. Gold, and everyone else.
Yeah, it's the stickmen who have just got exaggerated stats. So Mr. Gold is like incredibly quick, has tons of damage, tons of health, and then you got someone that's like Mr. Red, who starts off in danger, like literally one hit from fine, and he's pretty much on danger. Mr. Black, who runs at half speed. All sorts of exaggerated stats. But it's really cool.
I didn't realize we had Reservoir Dogs characters.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they had the 5 Mr. characters, and then they brought in the Mrs. characters for Outbreak File 2, Ms. Water, Ms. Peach, and Ms. White. Just totally exaggerated stats. They are a lot of fun to use, though, for sure. And, surviving a zombie apocalypse as a stickman / woman, I mean, there's got to be some fun to be had in that.
All right,
yeah,
so
it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary the amount of characters for a game for like 2005, 2006, 2007 is very impressive. Over 100 characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was awesome.
I mean that.
Good.
No, I was gonna say. I mean, that's not something that's unheard of either. If you go back to PlayStation days, like the PS1 era, Final Fantasy Tactics, for example, if you use the Game Shark, you can use any NPC on your party, and they all have different abilities and different stats and everything. It's really crazy to think how much the devs actually put into this that just you don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Harold, you were saying something?
Yeah, I was gonna say quick that when it came to me, at least with this question, uh, my favorite was George, but my least favorite had to be Mark. I just never was a fan of playing Mark, but I was a huge fan of playing George.
Yeah, Mark's kind of like, he's pretty basic. He's pretty simple. His power swings with melee weapons, especially on like File 2, are really, really nice. They do tons of damage, especially when you can start combining weapons a lot more. Like power swinging stun rods, like you can do so much damage with them. It's pretty crazy. And you can combine it, say, with Jim, his lucky coin he starts with, which actually halves like durability consumption rates on melee weapons. So you can give that to Mark and like a powerful melee weapon, and he's just set for days and he can just brutalize anything he wants. But you know, if that's not what you want in a character, then yeah, other than that, he's pretty bland probably. Although his voice actor in File 1 is great. Absolutely love him.
All right, so we're gonna move on to question number 6. Give your opinion as to why Outbreak File 2 underperformed compared to File 1 in terms of sales.
I think this is kind of honestly easy, given how the reception for like critically and I guess some fans, depending on you ask, at the time was lukewarm. It was not surprising that two did worse, especially given how the game is structured and whatnot, right? So like it underperforming compared to the first one is not too surprising.
I also heard that Outbreak, well, originally it was Resident Evil Online, and we're gonna get into that later about like File 3 stuff, cut content, but the game was split into two, and they sold like File 1, and then they sold File 2 later, and then this also sort of hurt it, in my opinion. But
There's a lot of things from like Outbreak in particular that just never made the cut. Like, there was gonna be like different types of weapons that just aren't in the game now, but like are still in the game's files. Like,
Yeah, you
I
can
think
hack
it
into
was
that stuff.
I think it was the YouTube channel YouTube what is it Kendo Gun Shop.
mhm.
They found out that there was actually a P90 in the files for Outbreak, and like you can get it to work, but you basically just end up doing like a fucking T pose in the game. So it's like stuff like that was gonna be in there. There was gonna be different like revolvers and stuff. I'm assuming also if we kind of delve a little bit deeper, there probably would have been more stages that just weren't there.
There definitely were. That's question 9.
Yeah.
But I felt like them slicing the game into probably did hurt it a bit, because that's asking like a bit to say, oh, here's this very fun game, now we're gonna slice it in half because we have like constraints, and now we have to deal with the fact that we have to sell the other part of the game again, and it probably didn't go over so well. But I do remember there was enhanced mechanics in Outbreak File 2. Like, I think the whole walking and shooting thing was first introduced in that game.
Yes, yeah, it polished up a lot of mechanics in the game, kind of tightened things up a bit. Why you couldn't just walk, aim in Outbreak File 1, I don't know, because video games have been doing that for years. I think that's like Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare, which came out in 2000 and I think in 2000 or 99. You know, you could do that, and
Silent
it's
Hill 1
like
as well.
Silent Hill 1, yeah, there's a lot of games that could do it. So I don't know why they decided to not have that in File 1. But yeah, File 2 definitely, it polished up a lot of mechanics in the game, made a few changes here and there, made the maps a bit more complex, more diverse, different types of enemies you're taking on. But I think ultimately the problem is that, you know, File 1 was an Outbreak in general is a bit of a niche-ish sort of genre. You know, especially at the time, there was kind of not really anything particularly like it. And ultimately, I don't think it just wasn't well known enough either. I think is the ultimate issue. I don't think enough people knew about File 1. So when File 2 sort of came out, it was like, it didn't make enough changes from File 1, which it couldn't really do, because then it would have just been a completely different game. But then it was some people wondering, well, why should I go back to it? So it was a bit of a catch-22, I think.
I don't think the marketing was big overall in general for Outbreak. I mean, you had the mainline games, you had Code Veronica. I mean, those games, and Code Veronica, if I remember, it didn't really sell that well initially either.
I don't
And
think it did, no.
no, I don't, because I mean, a lot of time it was initially released on the Dreamcast, and the Dreamcast failed as a system. It didn't have a lot of sales overall, and then it got ported over to the PS2 with Code Veronica X. But I think Code Veronica overall didn't sell as well as the first 3 entries.
Yep.
Yeah, I think
And
it wasn't the game's fault. It was kind of a bit of a victim of its
right.
surroundings.
Yeah, it was a victim of circumstance of just the way that the overall decline in popularity that Resident Evil was going through at that time until we got Resident Evil 4. And it was, again, it just didn't have as much marketing as I said in my story. For when I got introduced to Outbreak, I didn't even know that it was a thing until my friends like, "Oh yeah, I just got this game. You're a Resident Evil fan. You should play this." So it was kind of a weird situation when it came to File 2, because it's already riding off of a game that didn't it had mixed reviews. It had good new gameplay elements to it, and it was a good idea. It was just at a time that we weren't ready for it yet.
Mm.
In my opinions, anyways.
Yeah, it was easy to accuse it of being a bit more of the same. When you go into the details, it kind of wasn't, but like not enough people were doing that at the time, I don't think. And yeah, Outbreak File 1, I don't think was received well enough, so that when they brought out the second one, it was it was hard to justify it as a sell, I guess.
Surprisingly,
I'll tell you.
good.
No, I was gonna say, I'll tell you right now though, if they did that today, people would be really upset, because this basically File 2 is DLC.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it is. Yeah, it's DLC, but done 15 years ago when DLC
Right.
didn't exist, and it was had to be released
Right.
as a separate game. But yeah, nowadays, yeah, it's DLC and additional game mechanics. And
It's literally
updates.
on this DLC.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
completely agree there. That's effectively what it is. So no wonder it was a tricky sell.
And ironically, that's something that people roasted Capcom for to death with their fighting games, but that's a whole different story. I want to say that surprisingly, Outbreak 1 sold well enough, but the reviews weren't that great. I think because it is on Capcom's platinum list, so it did do decently, but Outbreak File 2 did not.
No, I mean,
At
not,
the
which
time,
is a
you have to
shame.
remember they did that Resident Evil Essentials bundle. So like once RE4 was out, it was like you could buy that with Code Veronica X and Outbreak File 1.
Mhm.
And also, to put in perspective for reviews, let's look at Outbreak 1. It has a 71 on Metacritic, right?
Yep.
For Outbreak 2, it's a 58.
Oh,
It's
so
kind
it's
of
even
crazy
lower.
because on a technical standpoint, it's the superior game.
Yep.
Well, but also look at it is it critic reviews or is it user reviews?
I'm talking about critic reviews. Yeah,
What
'cause,
about user reviews?
User reviews, I gotta actually open them individually.
Yeah, have a look. Yeah, it's very
Yeah,
different.
because I mean,
The
it
main criticisms, I'm sure, would have been
80
that it's just
okay,
didn't expand enough.
8.3 for 1 and 7.9 for 2.
Yeah, because I was gonna say critic reviews for me, in my opinion, like I look at them, I'm like, okay, that's fine, but user reviews are I hold user reviews a little bit higher because that's actual people. Like
That's the thing, though. You and I do that, though. I'm pretty sure most of us in this room
I
do.
know.
Common public, not so much.
We're talking about back in the day where you would get your reviews from, EGM,
Trusted source.
GamePro. Like you're buying the magazines and you're getting reviews from them. So I get it. It's
Yeah.
one of those things. It's the marketing, and if somebody's trashing a game, you're like, maybe I shouldn't get this.
Yeah, even I put it like this: no other review factors in but my own. So even then, it's like you look at this and you still see that File 1 is still higher than File 2 from the user standpoint. So I'm assuming that maybe either that decline definitely did happen and it was a thing even to the fans, and either that or they just weren't feeling the fact that this game was separated when that news came out later. So it might be a combination of one, the other, or both.
I think as well, you got to bear in mind that 15 years ago there wasn't like stuff like YouTube's or these giant internet things that everyone has access to, Facebooks and that, where a lot of advertising goes. A lot of advertising ultimately was done by word of mouth 15 years ago. There were people who read magazines and subscribed to bits and pieces, but a lot of it was kind of like seeing about what your friends were playing and kind of asking them about it and getting their opinion, thinking, would I give this a go? And again, I was thinking this point
Well-
about just not enough people played it.
The thing is, though, YouTube did exist 15 years ago. Literally, just the gaming wasn't
Yeah,
strong at that time period.
yeah. You know what I mean, though. It's nowhere. It's completely different to what it is nowadays, and people's access to the internet is completely different than what it was nowadays. So now you
Mhm.
can go on the internet, type in a game, and you could read 100 reviews about a game if you wanted to.
Information
couldn't
gets
do
around
that.
a lot faster today.
Yeah, you couldn't do that 15 years ago. You kind of had to go with people that you knew, or just take a punt of the game, just looking at its case and thinking, should I have a go of it or not? Especially for someone like myself, where I didn't have access to the internet for a long time. So I had just to make a kind of educated guesses. So
Cover art was like something that was like a big deal back in the day
Yeah.
because you had to like look at that and be like, well, if it looks interesting, then I'll play it. But
Now we take that for advantage.
now it's like more like, well, if it looks good on YouTube, or if I have the chance to play a beta or an alpha,
or watch someone
a
stream it on
demo,
Twitch or
yeah, or
anything like
so
that,
many different options compared to like
Yeah.
15, 20 years ago, where like
Yeah.
you didn't have that. You just kind of had to go off of what was on the box, or like
Yep.
what
Exactly.
somebody else like told you. Like you'd be like, I guess you would be lucky enough to like see your friend play it, or like go over to a friend's house and play it that way. But like other than that, like you had to just go off of what the box is telling you.
Yeah, things were mostly blind back then, really hard. Well, that's why I thank God for like stuff like Blockbuster, because at least you could rent stuff back then as well. It's like these days is either you
Oh,
can play the
definitely.
demo or buy the game. It's like one or the other.
I'll
Or
raise
you
my
never
glass
used,
to Blockbuster, by the way. I'm raising my glass for him.
Yeah,
You
pour
never
one
used-
T-virus out for Blockbuster.
Yeah,
Back from
Blackbuster.
the dead. They did it for like one day, and it was just like a fucking apparel store in like, I think it was like New York or LA, something like that. Like they brought Blockbuster back for a day just to sell apparel. It was like nobody wants that shit. They
No.
want to go rent fucking movies and games.
Yes.
But anyway, I digress.
It's the
There's-
GameStop rental program.
I've never heard of it.
Oh, yeah, that was a thing.
I've
Well, it
never
still
heard
is
of
a
it.
thing. What are you talking about? You go buy a
It is.
used game, and if you don't like it, you return it.
I never heard of this.
Me neither.
I never heard of this. And
They give you like 14 days to return a game, a used game.
oh, that wait, but I thought it applies to any game, right?
Any used game.
Any games? Okay. Yeah, okay, yes, what I have heard of it because no, I have returned a game within 14 days before. So
Yeah. I mean, I've done that where it's like, if I blow through a game because it's too short or whatever, I don't like it. I'm not gonna keep it. I'm sorry.
Right.
Extracurricular activity to do once we're done with this podcast.
Yep.
Do
So-
it at your discretion.
Yeah. So I guess we can move on to question number 7. So
I just wanted to say something really quick about number 6. As far as it like underperforming file 2, and just maybe like file 1, 2 to a like much lesser degree, obviously, because obviously it sold well enough to like warrant a file 2. But I honestly kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, where like I think these games were just ahead of their time. Excuse me, they were ahead of their time because online was just not a popular thing at the time, especially for gaming. Like even if you had like did get into online gaming, I think like the most popular place to do it, aside from like PC at the time, if you were into PC back in the day, was through Xbox Live, and even that was still kind of like fairly new. So it was like,
I don't even think it was a
games that failed at that time.
Yeah, I don't think it was a case of it not being popular. It's just that it wasn't accessible to a lot of people, and even those that had accessibility to it, it was very, very dicey because of these dial-up connections you had to run through. They could cut out and were very, very fragile. So, as I said, someone had to go first, and this was one of the ones that decided to jump first and see what was going on.
Also, in regards to Outbreak File 2, I think one of the things that probably hurt it a lot was Resident Evil 4. Because in the US, Resident Evil 4 released January 2005, and Outbreak File 2 was April of 2005 in the US.
Oh, you're right. I did not factor in Resident Evil 4 because that really did change the landscape for Resident Evil. And
Yeah,
among
And that was
other
only the
things,
focus of what they were doing. Yeah, definitely.
Yes, yes. You're actually right about that. I did not consider that.
Yeah, because I mean, and maybe even to a lesser degree, the first Outbreak in Japan, because Resident Evil 4 and the first Outbreak released fairly close to each other as well.
Oh, what didn't help the case either, though, is them not bundling Fallout 2 with something because
I know.
Dom mentioned that was it the
Resident Evil Essentials. It
yeah
was they did not bundle like it was a weird thing because at that time you had Resident Evil Essentials, which had, again, RE4, Outbreak, File 1, and Code Veronica. And also on GameCube, what they had was a like prequel bundle or like a remake slash RE0 bundle where it was
Right.
just remake and RE0 because like that was a thing.
I thought it had RE4 with it as well.
If it did, I'm not sure. I remember there being indefinitely RE0 and RE4, unless if that's a completely separate bundle.
Yeah, that's a collection. That's a collection. I know what collection you're talking about though, but I'm pretty sure that one in particular did also come with RE4 though. But that might be a different one. Who knows?
Even then, it's like as far as like RE bundles in general, like there was nothing for Outbreak specifically where they were trying to bundle those two games together and have them like in like one like complete package. Like
honestly, in that essentials package, they should have put File 2, not File 1.
Yeah, I mean, the only argument I would say against this is saying that they bundled Resistance with RE3, and that still didn't do too great. I suppose that's obviously for different reasons potentially. It's its own conversation, which we'll get into a little bit. But just to show that they did that, and that still didn't work. So
the thing with Resistance is that Resistance is a free game, whereas like Outbreak you have to pay for. So it's like it's a completely different thing. And also on top of that, it was like Outbreak File 2 came out at a completely different time.
I can't necessarily say that Resistance is free because you can't get it on its own. You have to get it for free. But again, this is
for free by buying RE3 remake. So like if you buy RE3 remake, you get it. So.
Given the price tag though, and given this is a completely different subject though, but given what RE3 is and how Resistance is, though, you're pretty much paying for two games in one package.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a price tag for two games, and if you only want one of them, then currently
you're out of luck.
You have to buy both, and that's just the way it is. So, but we'll talk a bit more about Resistance and an Outbreak later. There's plenty to be talked about there.
All right, so I guess we can move on to question number 7. Let's see who's gonna read this?
Apologize for the sirens. Somebody.
Yeah, I can hear that. I assumed they weren't after you, but
no.
I guess finally the T virus broke out and RPD's having a hard time.
Yeah, I'm waiting for Nemesis to bust my ceiling right now.
But Dom, you want to read this off since Brandon has sirens?
Yeah, sure. Number 7, right?
Yep.
What do you think of the additional modes and features that were presented in RE Outbreak? I didn't really delve too much into these modes. The only thing I think we played together was like the not the PvP mode, but like the kind of, I think it was like the boss rush. Yeah, we did
the showdowns.
We did showdown, and I think we did elimination, which is just you're going around in different rooms killing all the enemies.
Yeah. It was kind of like the it's kind of like the fucking like randomizer for like the rooms that they have for like RE Remake HD, where like if you go to one room, you like teleport into a completely different room.
Yeah, the maps don't ever change, but it takes rooms from across the entire series and kind of bundles them together. So if you've never played them, you've no idea what goes what. But like I've done them a lot, so like Elimination 1 and kind of Elimination 3. I can't remember where everything goes. It doesn't ever change, but it's kind of a nice touch, and you just got to go around and kill all the enemies that are dotted about within 30 minutes. Shouldn't too bad. I never. Certainly earlier on, like a lot of the modes, I think are fairly kind of like they're there. I mean, Elimination and Showdown are kind of their own maps more so, but yeah, like Alone Wolf playing at NPCs isn't really that different to playing with NPCs. And then you got obviously Infinity Mode, which just gives you infinite everything, which obviously makes the game just a breeze. You've got Friendly Fire you can turn on, which can be used for some PvP, or you just use it for Friendly Fire. I think the only real interesting one Friendly Fire has its places is actually Nightmare Mode, which was effectively a modifier on File 2, which you could put on any difficulty. And the whole idea was it just kind of changed a few bits and pieces up. Particularly, enemies just hit harder than they normally would do, and also healing items, specifically stuff like herbs, heal for less. So again, it kind of forces you again more to use kind of like people's abilities like George to like could take the herbs, convert them into pills, which still heal the same, and that sort of thing. Nightmare's kind of a nice little modifier to throw on. It does make very hard Nightmare like one of the biggest challenges in the game. When most enemies can like either like two shot you or three shot you, it makes it pretty darn brutal. I think it's like out of the modes that are available to get, I think it's by far the most interesting of the lot.
I'm gonna have to say that yeah, I agree. Even though I never played Nightmare, at least it changes more of the parameters of the game, whereas the other modes seem to be there just to fuck around with, like showdown and elimination, and even putting on PvP. I did play the friendly fire mode, but that was with like I think James and Drill. I don't think Don was with us during that, but that was fun to do.
Yeah, like you can do it as a
yeah, I don't
PvP, like
think I
especially like
remember
with in the
you're
the
good.
police station because everyone starts separate anyway, so you can kind of mess around with that. But doing it as just an actual still on co-op, for example, just makes it interesting because then you can't just go around spreading bullets or just firing grenade launchers around people because they really hurt.
Yeah, I
You
noticed
know,
that.
I mean, even like earlier today, one of the runs I was doing with randomizer effectively was friendly fire, but with melee only, which makes combat really difficult because obviously you're all trying to hit stuff and you just stop hitting each other. And there's all sorts of sort of nonsense that can sort of go on. It can be pretty entertaining. It can also be really aggravating. Again, it's a bit of your mileage will vary depending on what you like. But it makes it more interesting in a way to play every now and again. Just because, again, you can't just charge into fight and just all shoot the same thing because you're going to start hitting each other. So you have to be a bit more kind of strategic and tactical about what the heck you're doing and communicate. Which is the whole point of the game is communication.
I guess
And ultimately,
nobody's good.
let's go on. I was gonna say, ultimately, it was also kind of funny, just trying to pot shot 45 with Kevin, and as you fire, someone just runs in front and just gets decked,
I,
and it's
I
their fault.
I
That's always
guess
good.
no one talks about infinity mode because it's just basically easy mode with infinite ammo.
Yeah, it's just there. It takes forever to unlock, and once you unlock it, you're like, yeah, I've got it unlocked. Now what? The thing is, you can't even use it for like grinding points back in the old days because you only got 10% of points that you'd earn from playing infinity modes. It was kind of like there to like mess around with, but that's all it really was.
Interesting.
Um, the only thing I would say, as I mentioned earlier, is like when you start going harder in the difficulties, like from normal to hard, is definitely a jump in the game in terms of difficulty because it tends to introduce extra things you've got to do in maps. But the jump from hard to very hard is huge, and very hard is really tough when you first play it because it everything just hits really really painfully. Enemies get tankier, and it also messes around with key items as well. So, for example, with like the desperate times at the police station, you play it on normal, getting hold of the various plates in order to sort of move the unicorn statue. There are obviously places to pick up the plates, and you do that. And there's also some extra bits you can do to open a couple of safes to get hold of special items, extra ammo, that sort of thing. You play it on very hard, you've got to do every single additional thing just to proceed with the level and get to the second part. There's no extra stuff to do for extra items. You have to do the extra stuff to get the stuff you need in the first place. So you are forced to kind of do a lot more of the game. The Wild Things is another good example. You play it on hard or very hard. There's actually no power in the across the zoo at all. So you have to find a code to turn the power on, so you can actually start interacting stuff in the first place that you do straight away on normal. With raising blockades and shutting doors and that sort of thing. You can't even do any of this to start with in hard. You have to, or very hard. You have to find a code somewhere in the map to tell you how to turn the power back on. So there can be quite a jump. But ultimately, it's rewarding. It just makes it a more interesting game. There's more that you have to do, and you're kind of forced into doing it.
Anyone else on the additional modes question before we move on?
Personally, I think that they were a nice addition because, like, I don't know, how long was Outbreak? Do you reckon? Does anybody here?
Depends what you mean by how long. What do you mean by how long?
Well, like okay, so say you were playing on like normal difficulty, which I
Mhm.
presume would be like a lot of people.
Yeah.
How long would it go? How long is it from point A to like the end? To start.
I
to the
mean,
end,
if you've never
like-
played the game before, to say far one to do all the scenarios, you're probably looking anywhere from about like I don't know, say 6 to 10 hours probably. If you've never played them before, if you've played them all before, it's like a couple of hours probably, if maybe 3, because you just know where everything is. But yeah, when you first play it, like you're expecting probably to have to redo a couple of stages at least a couple of times. So you're looking, yeah, anywhere between I'd say like 6 and 10 hours.
Yeah. So like when it comes to like additional modes, and I feel this way about whenever there's an additional mode, like additional modes in the games, it makes you keep coming back for more. And while I personally actually haven't ever really played any of the additional modes in Outbreak because it wasn't like a game I've really played through, I think they're a nice addition. And the brief moments I have had with the additional game modes, they're fun. I think they were a great addition. I think they're just
Yeah,
in general a good
I,
time.
I think it's almost like a proto Left 4 Dead, in that it's a
Yeah.
game that ultimately is reliant upon replayability, and as such, it needs to do something so that if you do decide to replay the game, because the main game is itself, like say when it came out, if you're paying like 35 quid or something for a game that's in theory 6 to 10 hours, on the face of it, you're like, well, what's the point? But again, the whole idea is it's replayability, which is something that they tried it, and especially on online, there was bags of replayability. But again, we come to the original point. A lot of people couldn't get into that in the first place. They couldn't access that. But even on your own, there was enough replayability with different characters, the different game modes. Especially on File 2. File 1, you basically just got the difficulties, and that's about it. And the maps are all kind of operate the same, anyways. Whoever you play as, there's a couple of little neat things you can do. It wasn't until File 2 where there was a much more variability in how stuff works and how it goes.
Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much exactly my point. I think they're cool. I think they're good, and I think they were well represented and all of that in the game.
Yeah.
Just a really quick add-on point I wanted to bring up, because like as far as like replayability goes, like I think Capcom is actually pretty good with that kind of stuff, because like they've made like fairly short games that you could beat within like 2 to 4 hours on like average, but like they'll put in like a shit ton of stuff to do for like post game. That, or they just make the game fun enough for you to like replay it more than once.
And I guess ultimately, if you don't enjoy the game enough to want to replay it, then it doesn't matter what the game offers you to replay it, you're just not going to. That's just the nature of it goes sometimes. So, if you do want to replay the game, which hopefully people do, and a lot of people did do, there were a lot of different ways to play it. And again, File 2, as I say, from a technical standpoint, is just the superior game to File 1, because it added a lot of stuff in and changed how a lot of things work. But at that point, like, people who had already played the series had already kind of made the decision whether they liked it or not. So, and also arguably, File 2 is probably the harder game than File 1, especially on your own. It's a very tough game, File 2, on your own to play, because you're a lot more reliant on people using their various skills. So if you're stuck with the AI, you can only use one person's skills because they don't use theirs. So it's like, well, what do you do? So it's a tougher game probably, even though there's more stuff you can do and better ways to play the game.
All right, so everyone done with this question? We can move on to question number 8. All right then. So how do you feel about the virus gauge in Resident Evil Outbreak? Who wants to go first?
Honestly, the virus gauge in concept is cool, and also from a technical standpoint, it makes sense. Because if my source is correct, that the reason why they have it is so that people won't clog up the servers. So if that thing hits maximum, you're out.
Yeah, it was kind of a multiple reason. Yes, from a gameplay standpoint, especially 15 years ago, there was obviously server capacity issues. So it was a nice way of stopping games going on forever, which was a potential problem. You have the plot reason you can tie into that, and that you could say, well, like all the water supplies getting infected and it's stuff going around the city. And also it also just adds, just as a gameplay point, just a soft time limit on people, and that you can't spend forever trying to do. These are not particularly big scenarios, are some of them, and the idea is that you want to be kind of going, and it just kind of to add that extra sense of urgency, and almost that risk reward as well. That if the virus rates typically aren't particularly fast, but if you start getting attacked by enemies, it can spike very, very quickly, especially someone like Jin. For
Which would
example.
make sense.
Yeah, exactly. It does. It makes sense on a lot of fronts. I think it was pretty well executed. It does make things a bit painful sometimes, especially someone like Jim, for example. You know, who could get grabbed by a zombie and just has like a 6-7% virus rate jump. You know,
It's
that's
like this shit.
very.
Holy cow.
That's he's the most. He's super aggressive, so he needs to really avoid combat where possible.
Oh.
At least
Hello. Whatever that
cameo
was.
from the train.
Oh man.
Was he with-
Brandon's
So-
getting the ambulance, the firefighters, the police, and the trains coming in on the recording.
everything.
I'm telling you,
Help me.
those zombies are out there, man. They're trying to get you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was good in a sense of urgency, but it does get a little bit annoying because, as you guys said, there are characters where the virus rate goes up more faster than others. That's why I don't use Jim that much, because if he gets hit, takes too much damage, or if he even gets hit a lot, then it goes up rather fast, and you're not completing the level if that's the case.
He's a pretty advanced character to use, for lack of a better way of describing it. Whereas someone say like the Cindy or Mark's pretty high. Kevin's fairly quick actually as well, out of the 8 main characters. But yeah, like he's very, very quick. He's one of the fastest in the game. So it does take, you need some game knowledge before just playing as Jim, because otherwise you are really struggling. To be fair to the virus gauge, like the only chapters where it tends to really matter your virus rate is, say, decisions, because it's so goddamn long. End of the road, it can matter because when you're fighting Nyx at the very end, his attacks just do tons of virus damage. So it kind of gives you some wiggle room there, and also the police station because of the nerve gas, which kind of accelerates the virus progression. Outside of that, not really any other stages. The virus gauge matters really that much unless you've taken tons of damage, and if you've taken tons of damage, it kind of is irrelevant anyways. You might already be dead. But no, I think it from a plot point, from a gameplay point, and just from a pure server capacity point, I think it was actually quite a nice little mechanism to put into the game. I think it was pretty well executed.
Yeah, I like I said, good.
Oh, good. I was just gonna say really quick, like as far as like my opinion on it is that like I'm kind of 50-50 on it, because on the one hand I could see that as like a good like challenge, like it's almost like adding like the time limit mode from like Revelations 2, for example, where you only have like a certain amount of time to complete the stage, and you know, like taking more damage reduces time and things of that nature. However, I think like taking like say like later RE games into account that like more or less brought that feature back, like ORC, and I think Resistance also has a very minor infection mechanic, if I'm not mistaken.
There is infection. There is
But it's
infection
like
mechanic.
very
Yes.
minor by comparison to
Yeah, it's different,
Outbreak
but yes.
or ORC. So, but that beside the point, I just feel like the games that reintroduced that mechanic later down the line in this entire franchise kind of did it better. Now, again, I understand like for like server purposes, like that's what they had to do, but like going
For
back
solo
at it,
play, it was unnecessary.
yeah,
honestly.
or like going back now, like when you look at it from the perspective of like going through emulation, where that's probably not going to be an issue, and then like if they were to ever do an HD remaster again, that's probably not going to be an issue anymore. It's a very gated mechanic, so
Yeah,
I think that if they were to like say, you know, do a File 3 or just a Outbreak remake or reboot or whatever, there's a better way that they could implement an infection mechanic rather than what they did in the past. So
probably the way I always look at these sort of mechanics, especially in the front main game, is does it feel like it was arbitrarily thrown in for the sake of it? And I've always been able to sort of rationalize to myself that I don't think so. It makes enough sense in plot and in gameplay for it to be there. And it's kind of there, but it's not like the be all or end all. Like I say, a lot of stages, your virus rate doesn't really matter that much. If you die, it's not because of that, it's because of other reasons. So it's kind of something that's there in the background just to kind of keep players on their toes. And if they're unfamiliar with levels as well, especially if they're unfamiliar with levels, where it's more pertinent, it's kind of something they just got to keep an eye on, just keep a check of. But it's not like it doesn't. I don't think detracts from gameplay. I do agree that if they do a file for it, which we'll talk about later on as well, they perhaps could modify how it works and introduce it and use it as a better mechanic. But I think for what it is in the game, I don't think it takes away anything from the gameplay at all. And ultimately,
I
there's
ac-
also so as I said, ultimately there's the argument that like if people can keep getting down and get picked up by their allies constantly, there has to be something eventually gameplay wise that stops that from happening, and the virus mechanic also adds to that as well.
I like it in the terms of like of realism, right? So you're in the middle of a virus outbreak, you're getting infected. The more that you take damage, the more that you're going to become infected. I like that, and the fact you guys pointed out that Jim has a higher infection rate. There's a bit of realism to that in the sense that Jim's a skinny dude.
He
The
works in a
infection
subway.
or what's that?
He works in a subway. They're not particularly clean places, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, besides that, I mean, like he's a skinny dude. So in terms of any sort of toxins or anything that's going through his bloodstream, it's going to go through his bloodstream much quicker than say somebody like Mark.
Yeah.
So I actually like that they went as far as to put even that kind of detail in there. Not saying that it's perfect, but to add that kind of detail is a little nice touch to me.
Yeah, Yoko is like one of the slowest ones, but the argument is that she obviously has worked with Umbrella. She's worked in virology before, so in theory, she's got like
Right.
some kind of innate resistance to this sort of stuff because she's worked around it before. That sort of thing.
Or maybe
But
she's secretly popping some pills to help reduce the virus
she
infection.
does have some interesting backplot of some stuff that may or may not have happened to her, but that is a bit spoilery, and there may be people who don't know too much about that. So I don't know if I want to spoil that here, but
Right.
her background with Umbrella might not be is probably more than she just worked for them. There was some things that may have happened to her
Always
that she
is.
may or may not be aware of,
Always
which is
is.
which is referenced by Greg in Decisions. There was some crazy shit. It also comes up as well and is referenced in Resistance as well, actually, with Valerie, which is kind of nice.
All right, which question were we on?
8 currently.
Oh, okay, the virus gauge. All right. Yeah, I said all I needed to say about that earlier. So unless everyone's done here, I can move on.
I'll just say that I think it's a mechanic that I hope if we do get like a re-release or a remake or whatever they do with it, I hope it's a mechanic that they allow us to either like toggle maybe, like you know when I don't know if you play like multiplayer, you can like toggle on and settings on and off, or single player. It doesn't really need to be in single player, but if for a re-release, you would want to maybe try to capture that original feeling, and it would be nice to both be able to capture that original feeling and potentially just play without it. That's
Or
how I
even,
feel on it.
or even just have like some modifiers for lobbies that just let you modify how aggressive the infection rate is. A bit like what
Yeah.
Nightmare does. Nightmare is misconcepted in that people think that it makes virus rate go faster, which it doesn't. It just means everything else hurts more, so it becomes more apparent because you get down more. So in a roundabout sort of way, it does, but not directly. But you could implement something like, say, a Nightmare mode, which just like say makes virus infection rates a lot more aggressive, and standardly they're pretty passive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just kind of the thing. I hope we do see a re-release, remake, whatever they decide to do of Outbreak, because it would kind of be nice to, maybe have lobby modifiers and stuff like that. Would be nice to see.
We'll get there.
All right, so we're moving on to question number 9. This one's gonna be a long one. Did you see all the cut content that was in reference to Resident Evil Online? If so, how do you feel about it? So basically, the stuff that was proposed, what fans call the Fable Outbreak File 3. Did you see all the content there and the levels cut?
I'm aware of some of it. I'm not as well versed in it as perhaps I probably should do. A lot of this was ultimately ended up getting transferred into Outbreak for various reasons. But admittedly, I'm not as well versed in this as I probably should be.
Honk is just a cursed character, man. Every time he gets introduced into a game, either he gets canceled or his ideas get shelved.
Yeah, there was going to be a hunk scenario. Unfortunately, it got scrapped. That's one of the things that's listed in the wiki link. I'm gonna take.
Forever trapped in Resident Evil 2.
Yup, and I think it was gonna be UBCS as well. So you would see some people from Carlos's faction. I'm not sure if they would have showed up, but that would have been a nice reference if they did, and you could play it with them as well. So
Actually, you know what? You know the characters from Operation Raccoon?
mm,
This Outbreak File 3 would be the perfect way to introduce them into like the actual canon of Resident Evil if they ever decide to do it again, you know?
so Hunk having his protege would be canon since Vector is awesome.
Yes.
I would also argue like even those like Spec Ops characters, it's a good like opportunity to potentially do like a specific scenario for those characters to get introduced into the canon and into the lore with stories that not only make sense in the context of our like current Resident Evil lore, but also with much better writing compared to what they received with ORC and gameplay as well. So
There's also enemies that got cut as well. I think in the files you could discover, because I saw people like bringing this up via hacking mods. But there is a playable Birkin in the actual files that people were discovering. Well, basically a Birkin skin, and he was going to be a boss in Resident Evil Online before that got scrapped. There's also like zombies that got cut, G dogs, dogs infected with the G virus, plants,
That's
like
a good thing.
yeah, plants, liquors. It's a lot of stuff that got cut out. Also a bigger version of Neptune as well. That was gonna be a boss for the Pier scenario, and then they cut that to just gators, I think,
We're
or
going
regular sharks.
what are you gonna call them? Poseidon?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. That's what they were. There's also a level that was gonna take place in Raccoon City High School, and then that also got cut out as well. If you watch the original like Resident Evil Online trailer, you will see locations that clearly are not in the final product. I think there's also like a hotel that's not based on Hellfire, which is another one that got cut. So, what do you guys think about all the stuff being on the cutting room floor just to compensate?
give me Birkin with fireable human being.
Oh, yeah, I saw that glitch where he's
Or they
firing a
just give
human.
him another character model that he could just hold on to and fire like a gun.
What?
Yeah, the thing I posted in chat here.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
I'm aware of this. Yeah, it kind of doesn't. Yeah, plays all sorts
Yeah,
of
it doesn't
weirdly,
look
yes.
right at all, but
No,
it's
it,
fucking great.
it's really wonky. It's wonky
Um,
looking.
Yeah, no,
The enemies that got cut, I'm okay with that. Just because Outbreak as a whole did a good job with different variations of enemies. Like we got a whole bunch of new things that we never seen before, specifically the zoo. And if they would have put in a lot of the old familiar enemies that we've had, I think that would have taken away from what we got.
I I guess maybe just thinking about the scenario that was cut, maybe that makes sense because after all, you were dealing with like a force survivor type of scenario, and Hunk's team did run across Birkin, and I guess maybe that could have been like an impossible boss fight where you can't kill him because obviously the canon is he knocks Hunk out and kills everyone else. So that would
Yeah.
have
First
that would have been
invincible boss
cool.
in the series.
Yeah, that would have been cool to see, but outside of that, I just don't know how that would have worked. It would have been extra content that would have been cool, but for that scenario, it makes sense in my opinion.
I think it's just nice that there was. It shows that there was extra scope still within the company. A lot of things they wanted to do with the game, which I think in a way is kind of like a bit refreshing in a way. That there was stuff that they wanted to do but didn't, rather than perhaps a couple of games recently that there's a couple of things that they could have done but never had interest of doing in the first place. So it's kind of pick your poison, I think. It's kind of would have been nice to have seen some of these. I can understand perhaps why quite a few of them didn't come out. Ultimately, never quite made it. I don't think they were to refine things well enough to be for the series to kind of like really spawn its own stuff. It was ultimately a bit of a side project. I think ultimately in the grand scheme of Resident Evil. But it's nice to know that there was these ideas floating around that could have been perhaps in a different universe actually acted upon.
Yeah, I think the main thing that's written here in terms of why they scrapped it, they said the game became too big, so they had to file it down like twice. The first time was scrapping the Outbreak File 3 stuff, and then they had to do it again, but they didn't get rid of everything. They just simply split the games in half, and you have File 1 and File 2.
Pretty much.
Anyone else on this question?
Yeah, it would have been nice to see a lot. Like I know like it would have been nice to see a lot of those cut enemies. It would have been nice to see some of those cut scenarios. The hunk one is probably the more interesting of all of the cut ones for me. But yeah, it would be nice to see them come back in some form, maybe in the future. It just I don't know. They were cool. I thought they were cool overall.
Are we
Yeah.
allowed to talk about the leaks from Capcom at all?
No, because I want to. Unless you guys want to talk about them, and then I step out for a bit.
I just wanted to
could
mention
do
one
that.
thing, and that's why I was asking.
Hold
I
on.
don't have to.
You can. I can step out real quick and come back.
Well, actually, Ren, I got an idea. Let's do that after the last question. Like, have that as its own segment, and then we'll go on from there. Because I don't think we should interject that leak into like a main discussion, because that could kind of kill the flow.
Okay.
Oh, I mean, the only reason why I was bringing it up is because it does relate to what we're talking about. That's the only reason.
I know exactly what you're talking about, though, but that's why I want to keep it as a separate segment because of the subject matter.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Keep the flow just a little consistent until the end. So I can do that. So we can move on to the next question then, if that's the case, and that's question number 10. So what is your favorite and least favorite boss battle in Outbreak File 1 and 2? For me, I'm gonna make mine quick. I would say favorite boss would probably be Thanatos. I just the first one at least. I like how he controlled and ran all over the place, but when he transformed at the end with the giant arm and he started jumping, he turned into a bit of a bitch. Yeah.
He's dangerous. He's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, but it was interesting to figure him out and see how he worked and finally kill him. I thought that was satisfying. The one that I don't like would probably be Nyx, because for the life of me, I could not figure out how to kill him, and you have to be very distinct to do it. Like, you really have to know what you're doing with the radio and the rocket launcher. Otherwise, you're just standing there taking a lot of virus for nothing. So,
yeah, it's a bit of a puzzle boss. And like definitely the first time I took on, it took a little while to kind of understand what was happening. Thankfully, I got to the fight with like a bucket ton of weaponry, so I was able to like sort of save and I was able to reload it once I realized what was going on. But yeah, he's a bit of a pain. As even online nowadays, he's still a bit of a tricky fight in how he works. I'm still learning bits and pieces about how he operates. That you have to hit him in the core. That's his actual health bar, but you can hit him in the body to down him. You've got to shoot the tyrant part to open the core in the first place. Once you start hitting the core, it starts closing up again. It is a bit of a fiddly boss. I do agree.
Is this a fucking Devil May Cry 1 boss? You gotta fucking unlock the core, start hitting the fucking core, then fucking...
It's by far the most complex boss in the game by a mile, like a country mile. There's a couple of bosses that have particular like weak points, like Thanatos are. You can hit him in the core to sort of stun him and do extra damage, but like yeah, Nyx is by far the most complex boss in the game. Not even close.
what about anyone else?
My favorite is Tyrant R, because that man looks like a beast. He's literally a cybernetic enhanced Mr. X that can probably just clap most creatures in Raccoon City. He could probably go toe to toe with Nemesis and could potentially win. That's how cool he is, and I like it. I like him.
I think I'd probably agree, but having had to deal with him for years on very hard, like he's brutal. I don't know if I can agree anymore because he just is so difficult to take on.
I completely understand, because for some
dangerous.
reason Resident Evil has a history where a boss on a hard difficulty becomes pretty much a whole new game of his own.
Yeah, he's
Nemesis.
so dangerous. He has plenty of He's got plenty of insta-death attacks as well that you can get caught up in, which is pretty unforgiving. The one thing I think that's nice, I'll give the Tyrant, is the fact that as it's hinted in early in the stage in the road, Carter, the researcher kind of responsible for creating him, says that he's in case everything was to go wrong, he's programmed a giant bomb inside the Tyrant. So once you get hold of the remote, you can actually use the remote at one point during the level to take out the Tyrant, either initially or Tyrant R when he changes, or even you can even use it in the next boss fight to get an insta down and an insta max core opening, so you can just waylay on it early because it's pretty tanky to start off with. So it's a nice touch in that respect. But yeah, Tyrant R, like on very hard, he sprints so quick and he hits so hard, and he's a very difficult to dodge as well. Super, super dangerous. I've had a lot of runs into him. So as far as favorite bosses for myself, I do still like personally the Desperate Times standoff and the siege, maybe because it is just really hard. Which it is. It's like on your own, it's the hardest boss of the game. I'm pretty sure. There's a lot of tricks to deal with a lot of bosses in the game. Whereas that ultimately you're fighting 7-8 zombies at once in a small area. There's only so much you can sort of cheese the game. Ultimately, you're just going to get overwhelmed. But yeah, Thanatos is also really cool. Personally, I think like the music you have on him for like the final boss fights is also pretty awesome. I really appreciate that. Titan, the elephant from Wild Things, is definitely pretty memorable. And yeah, I don't think there's any real bosses I would say that I hate. There's some perhaps a little bit more bland than others. The G mutant in Blow Freezing Point is kind of like it's not too much to it. You just shove a train at it and shoot it loads, and you kind of just beat it. So, but I don't think there's anything I'd say that I hate specifically. Again, it's a mileage may your mileage may vary thing.
All right. Anybody else?
No, I said mine earlier.
Yeah.
What?
I don't really got any.
I can't. Well, yeah, I did say Nyx for bosses I could not stand. So, but yeah, that's it for me.
Yeah, I think only other one I would say maybe I'm not a big fan of is Dorothy. It's because she's kind of a tanky fight. It's a really awkward room to fight in. Whenever you hit Dorothy, you've got like just bricks and shit that just fall down. Again, this is speaking from having played on very hard for years, and my experiences is going to be a bit slanted by this. But like, she's a really horrendous boss to fight, especially like on your own or something, because you can't really shoot it properly. There's stuff in the way. You can't really get up to it properly unless you know the spot on the left side to get up to her to axe it. But she has like on very hard. I think she has like 13,000 health, which is just ridiculous.
So, which boss is this again?
This is Dorothy. This is the flashback final boss in the chamber. On normal, she ain't that bad because you've got like chemical bottles you can throw at her. But yeah, on very hard, the bricks that fall down hit you really, really badly, and she has so much health. It's kind of crazy.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the plant.
The plant, yeah, Dorothy. It's just a nasty room. You've got the drain suckers on the roof. They hit really hard when they grab you. And if you're playing it with like AI, the AI are pretty much useless in that fight, and they just take tons of damage. So you're kind of forced to do it on yourself. So yeah, some pretty bad memories of that boss fight. With people that kind of know what they're doing, it's not anywhere near as bad, but it's a real health sink.
All right, so I guess we can move on to question number 11. So, what are some of your criticisms with the original Outbreak games that could be improved upon if they made a new one? Okay, so I think mine's is very easy. I would say navigation is something that really needs to be improved upon. Not too easy, but just something where it's like there's a clear idea sometimes and there's less RNG puzzles, because I kind of found some of these encryptions and elevator codes annoying because they kept changing around, and I feel like that could be just a little bit more streamlined than what we got. Like, don't make it easy, but again, just don't make it so tedious where I need like 3,000 codes to open one door.
I actually could agree with that. What's up, now?
I said, don't make me decipher a Bible just to figure out the fucking first.
This
letter
isn't
of
Silent
the
Hill
code
3
in
where you need
there.
Shakespeare knowledge to get past the first puzzle in the game.
Exactly.
I know what you mean.
We're not asking to fucking solve like who fucked who in whose asshole on the
What?
on the,
Stop.
the 1st February
Stop.
in the 13th century. Like nobody wants to know that just to find how the fuck to get to the elevator. Okay.
Some
Just
some
saying.
Outbreak's puzzles are a bit arbitrary, and I imagine with 15 years worth of hindsight, I'm fairly sure it would be dealt with in probably a more user-friendly way. I would imagine.
You know,
I hope so.
they probably should have went the route. If the structure is not the same already, they should have went the route with Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil 3 already has like preset puzzles, right, or like, preset combinations of certain things, right? Just know you get the RNG is like which one is it going to be, because I think at least 3 or 4 combinations will be effective for like one puzzle. So they should factor in with that instead of just being completely RNG to a point where it's almost impossible to solve it like on the go.
Yeah, I mean it varies. Against ones I've mentioned, if you took 100 people and asked them the question, some would say, yeah, just have it so there's only 3 or 4 combinations. You'd have some would say, yeah, I don't mind it being like 100 possible combinations. I've actually got to solve the puzzle at the time. I might know how to solve it, and that might not change, but I still have to find the file and still work it out. I think that's down to personal preference. A lot of that, I
I,
would strongly suspect.
I do think though it will cut down the tedium of going to those same locations again, because if you know how the puzzles work, you should just at least remember the combination after a certain point. If there's like a
Yeah,
limited amount.
maybe so. Or what you do is you make the file not so out of the way to get hold of. It's something that you kind of will come across in your normal exploration anyway. So you're not having to like take a sidetrack just to get a file to solve a puzzle down a different sidetrack. Just make it fairly streamlined. So at least that would make it, I think, a bit better. I don't know. I don't think I'd mind either way. I think there's other things that are probably more pertinent. Although, yeah, they have to throw some puzzles in here and there. And I suppose like the best example of it, I actually think of how it could work is actually end of the road. Currently, there is the number puzzle. There is a 3-digit code you have to use in end of the road to open up various shutters across the facility. There's one of the pads that you go by, and like the second room you go and see, there's a dead guy, and there's 3 numbers on the code, the pad, that have bloodstains on them. So obviously those are the 3 numbers you got to press to put in the code, but obviously the game doesn't tell you what order to put them in, so you have to just trial and error it and work out which order is the correct order. I think something like that is it's sort of means you're not you can randomize it because it could be anything, but it's not arbitrary in that you're having to sit there and work out a puzzle. It's okay. I know how this puzzle works. I've got to press 3 buttons in an order. Right, it's these 3 buttons. So there's 6 combinations. You just got to try them until you get it right. I think something like that is probably the best way to do it, rather than having to hunt through files and randomize stuff like that, because that could get pretty annoying. I think that's a good example of how it could actually be implemented pretty well in the game that already exists. I'd argue. I think it's a pretty good way of doing it.
So one thing I think indefinitely has to change with a new Outbreak game is the invite system. I think like and obviously that's probably going to be given like just a simple
Yeah, the whole server
invite your
mechanism
friend.
is very
Like-
very 2006 because it was
Yeah,
made in
so, like-
2006, so it would
So
be
I think,
significantly
like,
better nowadays.
a
for sure.
more streamlined fucking invite system, private lobbies,
Yeah.
stuff like that, where like you can have it set to where you're not having to like go through like a bunch of hoops and ladders just to play the game.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Oddly enough, too, I will say just kind of like I guess like taking an idea from both RE6 and Resistance, I would not mind seeing like a Agent Hunt-esque type of mode where like if they were to implement something like that, where like you can go up against a player who's playing as like a boss character that you have to go up against. Like I think that would be pretty cool, but yeah, I don't think there's like a whole lot they're gonna need to do, because I think Ren pretty much summed up what I felt as well about Outbreak. So
Yeah, I think there's there's definitely some scope for some at least optional PvP. Um, Again, this obviously comes about the whole resistance thing, which obviously is a 4v1 asymmetric PvP. That's exactly what its nature is. And obviously, the big argument was, why did you make resistance? We wanted Outbreak 3, which is its own question. There's a lot of hindsight 2020 going on. Even at the time, it's easy to say they shouldn't have done it when you've seen that it didn't work. But at the time, it was not as it was not as clear cut, and they went for this choice. I think they deliberately went for this choice, so they thought that was the way to go. And for various reasons, it didn't work. But I think there's definitely elements of resistance that could easily be used in an outbreak. Some degree of PvP, maybe boss wise. Maybe have some scenarios which are co-op only, and maybe some scenarios that incorporate a PvP nature, rather than trying to do hybrids of both, because then you tend to get muddled in what you're trying to achieve with various stages if you're trying to have everything be all available to on all modes. I think kind of tailing some specifically for just a co-op experience and some specifically for a multiplayer PvP survivors versus zombie player mode, I think is probably a better way to do it in the long run. Otherwise, you get problems with balance. Um, I don't know. That may not be the case. Left 4 Dead did a pretty good job of doing that, so maybe Left 4 Dead is a good example. It's an old example, admittedly, nowadays, but it's Left 4 Dead is still played nowadays. It's still very enjoyable, and maybe something Left 4 Dead wise, maybe a direction that they want to sort of try and take for Resident Evil.
I think you're asking too much of Capcom, to be honest.
That's the problem.
Cap, yeah, Capcom, they tend to follow trends instead of making their own. We've seen them do it many, many times, and Resistance is their latest following the trend, which is Dead by Daylight.
Yeah,
Um,
which was always going to be tough.
yeah, I mean they're trying to capitalize on something that's popular, but not what makes them popular, which is the downfall for Capcom every single time.
I will cut Capcom a little bit of slack here, in that I think they accept and recognize that they don't have a very good track record in developing these sort of games, which is why they've sourced different companies to kind of work on these. Obviously they sourced Neobars to do Resistance. I think they sourced someone else to do like Operation Raccoon City or Umbrella Corps or whatever else. So also
Right,
obviously varying degrees of
Operation
success
Raccoon
slash
City
failure.
was, really quick. Operation Raccoon City was outsourced to Slant Six Games, which now they've been defunct for a couple of years now. Umbrella Corps, on the other hand, that was done in house, and
Oh, it was an in-house one.
yeah, it was done in house, and it was done by the same team that gave us RE7 and will be giving us Village. So
Seems crazy on the
Right,
face of it,
but
doesn't it?
well, because again, they're chasing trends. They were chasing the
Mm.
esports trend. They're trying to get into a market that they're not known for.
Mm.
That's
Yeah,
that's
which is a fair point. I mean, I
Like,
can't completely berate him for
you
trying.
can. I mean, this is the same thing that I personally was saying about like RE7, and I still feel this way about like Village. Is that like the way that they have that game play in particular? That's like they're trying to get on that like Outlast Amnesia type of trend, and you know that's the one thing where they're able to clearly make money off of. Like I will, give them credit on that, even though I don't particularly like that direction. Um, RE7 is in top 5 out of best 100 selling Capcom games right now. So
Yeah,
like,
ultimately that's business. And end of the day,
I
if there's, I mean, zombie. I mean, Left 4 Dead. Going back to society, obviously it sold incredibly well, but it was at a time where everything had a zombie mode. Call of Duty had a zombie
right.
mode. Freaking anything you could think of had some kind of zombie mode in it. Battle Royale has been the thing for the past several years. And loads of things have tried throwing in battle royale modes of their own. It's just the nature of gaming a lot nowadays. I think to do it, companies will do it. Problem is, there's something with Resident Evil, which I think is a series that does rely heavily on its nostalgia value compared to a lot of other series. It's a very kind of dangerous mixture trying to take that nostalgia value that people still have to the series, and then you're sort of incorporating it into something like Umbrella Corps, which is just so completely alien from where you started.
I think like it's fine for like a spin-off, but for like a mainline game, that's when I start to think like I really wish they would go back to like what they used to do like back during like the PS1 and PS2 days, where like if it was too different from RE, like whether it be playstyle or just like overall aesthetic and like idea wise, they would just scrap it as an RE game partially and just create something new out of it and kind of just take the framework from like what they cut out and start again in terms
Yeah,
of like, developing
it's not.
that RE game. But they're
Yeah,
not
it's
gonna
not.
do that.
It's not a bad argument, although
Like,
I
'cause,
don't
I
know.
mean, that's how we got like this is how we got like Devil May Cry, Onimusha, Dino
Hmm.
Crisis, Haunting Ground. Like a good number of games spawned out of RE, you know. But this is like back when they were like okay with like, you know, trying to do something different with RE and then realizing, hey, you know what, this is just way too different for RE. Let's make rather than just scrapping the whole project, let's partially scrap it to where we take the framework of this and you know try to do something with it for RE, but then also all the shit that doesn't work for RE, just make that into a new game.
Yeah,
I agree with you on that. It's when it comes to Resident Evil 7 though, like and I agree with what you're saying that they're trying to follow the Outlast and all that stuff. And to be honest, I personally don't like the Outlast series because it's just instead of building on fear like Resident Evil used to with survival horror and stuff like that, Outlast just builds on fear with stress and tension where you can't fight back, you just hide and I don't like that style of gameplay.
It's basically just run, hide, and listen to the scary sounds and visuals
Right.
that pop
And
up.
and and I don't like that. But Resident Evil 7 took that and added some of the survival horror elements into it where you can fight back and that's why I personally I like Resident Evil 7, but I understand what you're saying.
Mm.
And
Not like,
if you really
like, I
break
don't
it
wanna
down,
go
without
like,
Resident Evil 7, we couldn't have Resident Evil 2 remake. They had to get
well,
back to the horror side of things.
that's the thing with that. Like, and again, I don't want to go on a whole tangent about it, but
Yeah.
it's like the way that RE2 remake and like RE3 remake are. If there's shit that people like gave that game nines and tens out of, you basically kind of gave Capcom the go ahead to, you know, cut corners and do anything that you might not have liked in those two remakes. Like that's basically what RE7 was. Like everything that those two remakes did, like that's what you gave, like not you specifically, but like the people that gave like nines and tens for those, like for 7 in particular, that's basically what you said. Hey, go ahead, do that for RE2 and 3 remake. So
it gave them a license to continue to
That's-
experiment. Yeah, I mean, this is a
But
valid
that's-
point. When we know more about Village, this will come up as a question mark over Capcom.
yeah, but you know, I don't want to go on a whole tangent about it because that's diverging a little bit. and-
No. The one thing I will say is that I'm no expert on this. The only issue nowadays is that when you're building a game from the ground up, like it's a long, expensive process, and you can't just churn out games from the ground up like once a year or once every 18 months. It's not that easy anymore. I'm pretty sure it's not like back in like the mid 90s. I know obviously our development processes are completely different, but they're just innately so much more complex and there's so much more to do than it was in the mid 90s with like a top down racing game, for example, you know, which is significantly easier to program, to style, and to get running. And you could do that in a fairly prompt sort of time for a video game development. Whereas nowadays, you know, you can't just be bringing out new titles with new engines every year. It's just not physically possible. It takes time to develop these things. So that's one part I will give Capcom on that side. But yeah, I suppose getting back more to the appropriate question, with criticisms for Outbreak, there's definitely a lot of things they could improve upon. I still think an Outbreak game with like the RE engine that they used in the remakes seems like the most obvious way of doing it. I'd rather do that than say a first person version. I don't think that really makes too much sense to me. I think the RE engine is a great example of how that could be used. I personally go with like the Ghost Survivor stuff, which I thought personally I really enjoyed them, and I could easily picture like a variant of that theme being incorporated into Outbreak, which is sort of what they did with Resident Evil Resistance, anyways, which wasn't which in a broad scheme is not all that dissimilar to Outbreak. As people to listen to this and cry, um, but you know, in a broad scheme, it's not particularly different. So I could easily see them using the engine. It's what the engine I would suggest to use. It just feels the most appropriate for it. It's fairly solid. The gameplay mechanics are pretty solid in that respect. So they wouldn't have to change too much. You've just got to decide on how they want to actually design the game to work specifically, and then kind of model it around that.
Yeah, Resistance overall feels like a smaller scale Outbreak. As to what, like you just said, I mean, they have a lot of similarities, and it could be maybe a stepping stone to what we could potentially get later on.
Yeah, Resistance is its own oxymoron in that it's innately very similar and at the same time incredibly different to what Outbreak was. And it was a game that in its premises was actually fairly simple, but once you drill down to it, was so complex that you couldn't actually effectively balance the game in amongst itself. And once you put in anything new, everything changed. The meta changed, the basics of the game changed, and it became just a nightmare between updates, which were fairly common and fairly rapid, which I had nothing against, but it just changed so
Right.
much about the game. And that was the argument with that against, say, Dead by Daylight, whereas effectively you're 4 people turning on 5 or 7 generators and dealing with someone who can kill you, who you can't defend against. Resistance was significantly more complicated, and that's something that Outbreak needs to be careful of if they do go for a file free, is not to overcomplicate what they're trying to do. I think that's a pitfall that Resistance ultimately fell in. It's not people that I don't think people really realized that was the case, but it was such a complex game at its base that once you try to do anything else with it, suddenly it went all completely out of whack. Nikolai was the best example. The game was sort of reasonably ish balanced. They brought in Nikolai, who was a very gun heavy character, and ever since then, it's especially on PC, it's all just guns, 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 guns. It's why they call it Gun Hazard in Japan. Because that was all it was. Consoles a bit more varied because of the way the controls work. And they've obviously been trying for months to try and to balance that. They've kind of gotten it there, although the player base is now not there really to receive it, as is the way with 4v1 games. You see the worst version of 4v1 game is when it comes out typically. It needs time to be refined and go through actual live players. So I think that's a hole that Outbreak needs to try and avoid, is to not overcomplicate itself. This is why I say something like Left 4 Dead is a good example, because there's enough going on. But at its core, it's still fairly basic enough in its premise and what it's trying to do. It's not overly complex, which I think is something that Outbreak needs to, if there is ever a file free, it's something it needs to try and capture. I'm done.
All right. I think it's time for us to move to the next question because that kind of did diverge a bit, but
Yeah, it was always going to that one. It was always going to.
All right, Ren.
All right, so the next question is, how do you feel about Outbreak's canon to the Resident Evil timeline in regards to story?
Well, that's kind of complicated now thanks to remakes,
Yep.
because the remakes contradict a lot. I mean, a lot of things now, thanks to them trying to be, I guess, different in a way. Because like biggest example for me right now would be Marvin's bite. He got bitten trying to get his fellow officers outside the city, right? Whereas in the remake 3, it was Brad that bit him, and
Yes.
obviously that it's a conflict of interest in that regard. So
yeah.
I like Outbreaks
for-
better.
for
Yeah.
Outbreak, for Outbreak to even be remotely canon to the new timeline they are trying to establish, they would need to remake them into what's grounded in remake 2 and 3. Because remake 2 and 3 already conflict with previous lore with Resident Evil 1 remake and whatnot, right? And so we add in Outbreak, though it just makes the problem worse.
Yeah, it depends how you view all this sort of revisionist history, which is something that we've talked about in previous podcasts, and how you view it. And do you take it as canon over the original? Do you look at it as a separate kind of instance in universe? I think from a development side, I mean, if I was like the developers of this game and I'm on this series, I would feel probably rather constrained doing games, and like everything you do that involves a character potentially from the past is to go through everything that happened in previous games and make sure not to contradict. That's an incredible time sink. And probably quite a frustration when all they want to do is just kind of build a new story with the characters they've got in their hands and kind of integrate them all amongst themselves as best as they can. They don't want to feel like they're kind of being held ransom over something that happened in a side scene 15 years ago. So like I can see the side of things then. To be fair, I think Outbreak's canon in the main line of things is fairly minor. Obviously some of these characters come up with Alyssa comes up in Resident Evil 7, which I'm aware of. A couple
Bring
other
that up.
characters pop up. Yoko is referenced in Resident Evil Resistance.
Kevin is
Um,
in Resident Evil 3 remake. You can hear him
Yes.
on the police car.
Really? I
Yes,
never knew
yes.
that.
I believe,
Yeah.
yeah, I remember hearing if it was
When
apparently
when
him.
you leave the when you leave the RPD and you're going towards Kendo's gun shop.
Yes, there's a
if
car
you-
you go past.
Right,
Yes,
there's a police car that you go past, and Kevin's on the radio asking for backup with 4 other civilians.
Oh yeah, he
Yeah,
is talking
that.
about like Jay's bar that he has like survivors there.
Yeah,
Right.
it's a reference to that. I missed it for a long time. And I only recently I was playing through the game recently to get some voice lines. I was listening. I was like, holy crumbs, how did I miss this?
Yeah, that was one of the
Um,
first things I noticed. I was like, oh my god, really? They canonized Kevin and apparently 4 of the survivors, which I'm assuming one of them was Alyssa because, like you said, she was mentioned in Resident Evil 7.
Yeah, Rita as well, who first appears in Desperate Times for File 2, is re-referenced in Remake 2. She's one of the officers, Rita Phillips, whatever it is. So like there's a lot of kind of little protruding tendrils from Outbreak to various other games, but like the implications on the series as a whole is fairly minor. It's kind of like little niche cute references of people that have played these games and can kind of spot them. And it's like, that was nice. But it's not like anything that's like hugely overarching on the series.
Yeah.
So like you've got a lot more leeway. It's not like, for example, say, I don't know, like redoing Resident Evil 1 and like say Jill dies in canon in the remake, which makes no sense because obviously she's been in every other game. You couldn't do that. Whereas something in Outbreak, you can have a bit more liberty with the game's canon and its story because it ultimately has less implications and less people probably know the original canon in the first place, which is probably why people had offense over some of the stuff that happened, say, in Resident Evil 3, because that was a much more widely played game and they messed around with stuff that some people didn't obviously appreciate. But it's nice to see that there are references to the series dotted about and that they are recognized and not completely forgotten. And of course, it's little teasers like that which keep making you thinking, will they ever do a File 3? Because they keep dropping little references to the old games, which is pretty fucking cheeky of them to put it mildly.
It does make me wonder, since they like put that there, if like perhaps they might do something to try to make it fit more in line with like the remake canon at some point. I'm not really sure.
Honestly, if they really care that much, they really would need to have to though. Because Resident Evil 3 itself also kind of have another problem that kind of goes forward into the lore though, but that's another conversation.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of problems with Resident Evil 3 remake.
Yeah, which we've talked about previously. So, but there are different general concepts to recognize, and as I'm okay with little dots in here. The fact that the daylight existed and that there was a way to cure the virus, which could easily be tied into sort of some of the stuff maybe with not terrorist, but the BSAA, as a basis for them trying to create these various vaccines to different virus variants that have come up across the world over the course of time. That all kind of started with the daylight, which was the progenitor for dealing with the T virus. All that kind of stuff. There's a lot of nice ways to tie stuff in.
If I'm not too
Yeah, I mean,
mistaken. Oh, go ahead.
No, go on.
Oh,
No,
okay.
you got it. Go.
If I'm not too mistaken, didn't they reference Rita in Remake 2?
Yes, she was one of the officers that are on the desks. Rita, she is one of the officers on the side, which I noticed it when I first played the game. I immediately saw Rita's name and I thought, that's pretty cool, and I appreciated that. I missed the Kevin one on Remake 3, but yeah, that's a big one that a lot of people noticed who played Outbreak. A lot of people on my channel were playing for the game and were like, yeah, Rita. I was like, yeah, I noticed that, and yeah, I saw that reference. I was like, you bastards.
I'm just gonna assume with the way they're changing things now, and there was a lot of changes to the backstory of Leon and Claire, and even some to Jill, because I believe the whole house arrest thing was in Remake 3 only, right?
Yeah, it was never.
Well,
Well,
if you read the books,
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
it's varied a lot, yeah, because like in RE3, the game, it doesn't really make any suggestion of this. If you go to the film, she was kind of like suspended off the force, in theory because of irons. In Remake 3, she's under house arrest. It's something that has changed a bit over time.
Okay.
And also, if you read the books from SD Perry, she goes into that as well. That she's kind of taking a leave of absence from the Force or from stars because of irons and like I think honestly I think that they're kind of cleaning up the timeline a little bit, and they're grabbing some references that they can use to do that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I'm assuming that they're still probably gonna do it, but in a different way, which is why I saw like Rita's name on the desk, and I heard Kevin over the radio, and I'm like, well, yeah, well, especially the latter, that brings a lot more attention to the whole situation.
Right.
Especially with what happened with Resistance just a year later.
Mm.
Oh, if no, in the same game, of course. Yeah, even so, that's a good point. And the fact that again referencing Yoko with Valerie and her background, it's not like they're completely ignoring that Outbreak exists, which probably infuriates some people because they wanted that instead of Resistance.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
like the characters clearly do exist though, because if it didn't, then that would actually be a bigger problem than not, But just the scenarios of the characters' actions, they gotta do something about that because they are contradict, one thing with Marvin. That's one example, right? So like, if they really want to see these characters again, they're gonna have to like retell those scenarios to make sense within the remake continuity.
to be honest, because Marvin getting bit by Brad instead of the way that it played out in Outbreak, I think they could still keep that, but just Marvin doesn't get bit the way he does in Outbreak.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Mhm.
it's a small change. It kind of sucks because I like it better in Outbreak, but I mean, it's something that's salvageable. And if you look at a lot of specifically Resident Evil 3, they do a lot of retcons with a lot of different things, and especially like the vaccine at the end that Jill gets. I guess spoilers for people who haven't played RE3 remake. The
Oops.
vaccine for me, oops, reminds me of the Daylight vaccine
Yeah, it's the same
because
sort of principle.
you got to collect the different items, you got to mix it together in a very similar way that it happens in Outbreak. So to me it seems kind of like a retcon because they also retconned Nemesis Parasite, that it's Las Plagas, it's connecting to Resident Evil 4. So
That is still
is
technically a
that
theory at this point because while yes,
well
Resistance said it though, but there's some elements of Resistance that's not even canon either. So you got to take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
take it with a grain of salt. It's in a Resident Evil game itself. I
Mhm.
mean, I consider that close to canon because it's in a Resident Evil game itself,
They've set up the avenue. If they want to do it, they can. They've
Right.
kind of left themselves a window to jump through. Now,
Right.
whether there's a trampoline up there to sing them back up or just a pit of spikes, I don't know yet. We won't know until Resident Evil 4. But no, they've left an opportunity to do some retconning, and it's not like the Resident Evil series has never seen a retcon before. This has been happening
Yeah.
for over 20 years in some forms or another. So it's
The
just
question is
the way it
though,
goes.
like how the retcon will affect, the past and the present and the future,
But
This
again,
right here.
this comes back to the whole initial point of how do you view these remakes? Do you review it as this is now the new consistent canon that we should all follow, or is this just a retelling of the original canon, which is true? This is the problem. I don't think this has ever really been like in my mind. I don't think Capcom have ever really like it's been talked about this whole thing, but I don't think they've ever said like specifically this one is true, this one is correct, that one is the old one. This is what it's got to be now. So I think that's the problem. It comes down to how you view it, and how you view it alters how you answer the question and how you receive the answer to the question. So
So that too though, but when you take into account of like Resident Evil 1 remake, every single piece of continuity always references that as a primary source of the Resident Evil 1 events, not the original Resident Evil 1. So you take that into account though, it would be a safe bet to consider Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes the face of the events of
It's,
well,
yeah,
1, 2, and 3.
it's a difficult argument though. Again, I know we're getting slightly off topic here, but
Here-
this is pertinent. Is that Resident Evil 1 remake came out about, I think it was about 4 or 5 years after the original, and again, most of the additional stuff they threw in was kind of supplemental to the original story. These remakes are almost 20 years prior to the original games coming out, so as a developer, you're going to have a ton more license to mess around with the story because ultimately there's going to be less people that have played the original because it's less recent. So people, they will mess around with it more. And again, as was kind of noted with 7, that was kind of the license to say, yeah, go exploring. They kind of had it. So
to be fair, the original remake was e- extremely close to the original game. I mean, like they took pretty much almost everything that was in the original game and just expanded on it. So the core story was pretty much there. They didn't really change much of anything as far as the story itself.
exactly. So yeah, that's the argument I will always make with people. Like, if they view that the old canon is still the true canon, it's a retelling, then you can kind of in your mind kind of feel more okay with there being these modifications because it's kind of like just a retelling of the same story. It's like, if your grandparents were told an old fable and then they told their kids and then their kids told you, they'd probably tell a little bit of a different story to what was told like 100 years prior because it's just word of mouth. If you think
Right.
these are the official new canon, then suddenly it has massive more implications. So
In a way though, this also feels like a glorified like the scenarios in was it Dark Side Chronicles and Umbrella Chronicles. You have your retelling of the events of whatever game they have there, plus their unique stories that are that take place before, after, or whatever in the timeline. So in a way though, this feels like the remakes are glorified versions of those. You know,
yeah. And some
which kind
people
of
ultimately are going to be significantly more pedantic about these details and are going to be much more particular about them and much more concerned that they should make sense compared to, say, a more general audience who maybe don't care and maybe just want a story that kind of makes sense. And that, if there are elements to a story that made sense better told how they are now than they were 20 years ago or 15 years ago, tell them as they are now. It makes for a better story and a better playing experience. You shouldn't feel completely hamstrung by 25 years worth of story. Feel that you can't step out of it at all. You have to have some kind of creative leeway, I think.
all right. Now,
Hold on, wait a minute. Before you do this, I just want to mention one thing.
what's up?
So you guys were talking about how Capcom likes to, basically say, this is canon, that's canon, this is updated, and then they choose different games as a focal point for the remakes. So in the case of Remake 2, they were talking about the backstory of that and sort of putting that at the forefront for a while. So didn't they do that recently with 3 and people had like a little bit of a problem with that? I'm just sort of
Yeah.
wondering about that.
Yeah, yes, because how 3 was made, because 3 cut out a lot of things that make sense in the context of 3.
Yes.
So
It-
like in the case of Resident Evil 2 though, like a good chunk of what made Resident Evil 2 RE2, is still there, just in a different coat of paint. In the case of Resident Evil 3, it's almost like it's like a facelift. It's a whole new thing. You don't recognize it.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to mention is that it's not the first time either, because I strongly believe that when Remake 1 came out, that canon basically overwritten the previous one, but the only difference was that it made a little bit more sense in comparison to these remakes right here.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yes.
the main difference with Remake 1 was Lisa Trevor and that
Yeah.
whole side of things. That as far as the original plot for the original game, it was largely unchanged. But again,
Yes.
they kind of had to be a bit more concerned about the original plot because the original game had only come out like 4 or 5 years prior. So there was
6
a
years.
lot more recent 6 years. 6 years. So there are a lot more people who are a lot more familiar with the original story because it had only been a few years prior. This is almost 20 years difference, and only like a small section of people would have either recently played the game or realistically ever played the old games at all because people move on. You got a whole generation of gamers that would have tried Remake 2 and did try Remake 2, having never touched like any of the old classic REs. So if you do change some elements of the story, they're not going to know that. And
That's
ultimately,
true.
to them, they're not going to care that the things have changed. What they want is a game that makes sense to them.
I do think you RC are underestimating those gamers too, because let's say if like the people that played those games, the older ones, knew about the story, and the that majority becomes a minority now, right?
Yeah.
There's still people out there who are new Resident Evil fans are actually catching up with the games. Like even if they don't play it, though, they could go on like YouTube and watch them or lore videos,
Yeah,
whatever, right?
yeah. This is true. I can't dispute this, but it's ultimately it's a minority of a minority. And when you're doing this sort of thing, you're not gonna be able to please everyone. I'm okay, with like say with little changes to people's backstories. Like I couldn't care less if it makes more sense now than it did 20 years ago. Then go for it. When you start tweaking with major plot lines and stories,
That's the problem.
it has to be justified. The whole Nathaniel Bard stuff for Remake 3, for example, I was okay with because the original plot in Remake 3, it didn't really make any sense why there was suddenly a vaccine in the raccoon hospital. It was just kind of in a couple of files, it said, there's a vaccine, this is how you make it. It made no sense how it was made. So
Right.
they put in place a plot which made sense of it. And this is always my argument for Remake 3. It's a game that in its micro, there's a lot of detail pro in the game so that everything makes a lot more sense than it did in the original game. The problem was in its gameplay aspect. But from a plot aspect, it tightened up a lot of loose threads from the original game, which is, relevant.
And that's something I was going to bring up too, is because if you look at Resident Evil 3 Remake from a story standpoint, it does fix a lot of the problems that the story overall has because we were left in the dark with it.
Yeah.
And I think moving forward, and this is more me kind of being a little bit more hopeful, moving forward with whatever next game they produce, I feel like Resident Evil 3 Remake story is going to be a little bit more appreciated, right? People are going to appreciate it a little bit more because it does fit better than the original story.
Mhm.
Because the original story is just Jill leaving, but like you said, the hospital scene, I mean, that's a big plot hole. Why is there a vaccine there? We don't
Yeah.
get any reason for it.
Yeah,
Why
well,
are there
even having recently replayed the game on my Twitch channel like a couple of months ago, I specifically went into that bit after having done the remake, going through documents to try and understand why it was there, and nothing really ever said. It was just a file saying, "Oh, we're working on a vaccine in this hospital. Why
why
the
are
hell
there
is
hunters there? Why are
yeah? It's just there. It's just
well,
there.
one
So
thing to consider too that it is an umbrella hospital, so clearly, there's something
yeah,
there,
but
it
how?
wasn't.
yes,
It
But then
wasn't.
it was about how on earth was this stuff going on, and the general public didn't know. At least in Remake 3, you had this massive underground complex where all this shit was going on. In the original game, it was just a below level basement lab where suddenly you've got fucking hunters in pods. Just out of nowhere. Like you've got cleaners, you've got janitors. It wasn't like it was not findable. It was just literally you go on a lift, you go in the basement, you go down a corridor, open a door, and there's hunters in
Well,
chambers.
that's
How
assuming
would
if
people have
you
not
let
seen
the
this?
well, that's assuming if you let the general public go down there, because remember, raccoon is heavily controlled by Umbrella, so they will
Well, it's not
obviously
even that.
have
Just,
things
just,
cut
just
off.
anyone could have got. Anyone could have gone down there. It's just some
Jill-
person who got lost. Could have
Jill
ended up
said
down
it
there.
best in Resident Evil 3 Remake. How the fuck did nobody see this?
Yeah. In Remake 3, in Remake 3, it's like it's not ideal, but at least you can debate that it's heavily underground. At least in in the original, it made no sense. So yeah, like I say, we can mess around with cannons, as long as it's not too pertinent to the main story. You can kind of get away with a lot of this stuff. It's when you start tweaking with a lot more intrinsical details, you suddenly lose a lot of that leeway.
I think as far as story wise goes, if they continue making remakes and assuming they do make an Outbreak remake one day or reboot or whatever, I think as far as story goes, they're tying it well. It's becoming a well threaded story as opposed to what it was before.
Yeah, and ultimately, you're going to have loads more characters. You're going to have a lot of base characters that were not in the original game, anyways, in the original remakes.
Oh,
So in the
you
original
could
Outbreak,
you
so
could
you can
even
do whatever you want with them.
yeah, you could even have current characters like Marvin be a playable character in Outbreak.
Yeah, Kevin for sure. There's going to be some that it makes sense throwing in, but there'll be plenty of characters that are completely brand new, and you can do whatever the hell you want with them, and you can find other ways to try and tell them in. So Anyways, I'm fairly happy.
Yeah, I just wrote that last jumping point in the chat. Like maybe they could also use story characters from Resistance because Resistance did have like, you know, the firefighters and Valerie and everyone else, so maybe they could
Yeah.
use those people too.
There's
Yeah,
always
Which
ways.
then could
yeah.
which then could tie into the lore for Resistance, and that would actually be a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, ultimately you've got Raccoon City, a population of 100,000 people, and there's one thing that ties almost all of them together in some way or another, and that is Umbrella. So you can always draw little distinctions of things that happen, and you can always find little tying points. It's not too heavily difficult to do.
All right, so I'm gonna let Mr. Brando take over so I can mark this timestamp.
Yeah. Okay. Folks, from right here, at this time right now, we are going to be discussing a leak involving Capcom. Now, the reason why I have it set here is because, given the subject of the leak, it is a ransom leak by a couple of people that held Capcom's data by hostage, and they were slowly releasing it by them not giving them the money or whatever what they wanted. So there's a lot of people in the community, or just people in general, do not like the idea of discussing this leaks, given how they were released through illegal means. Granted, leaks in general are handled most of the time through suspect means anyway. So you're gonna like have people talk about it anyway, because it's a free world. They can talk about it if they
One
want to.
question: do I expect in the morning to have people in big uniforms arrest me?
I can't confirm or deny it.
Here's
Yeah,
what
That's
God,
good.
they're coming
That's
for
good
you.
enough for me.
here's what I
Right.
want to say in regards to what we're going to discuss, because I don't really want to go in too much detail, because I know that some people don't want to hear too much about it. They probably heard some things in passing, and that's really what I just want to say or talk about just really quick. I don't want to go like into everything that was leaked or anything like that. I want to keep it in regards to just Resident Evil and
Yeah.
kind of just that's it.
Yes.
You know, because
I
there
know
were
we
some
want to talk
some
about-
Resident Evil games that were leaked, and that's what I just want to discuss really quick with you guys.
Go
I'm
right ahead, go
only
ahead and
vaguely
mention
aware
it.
of all this, so yeah.
What's that?
I'm
Go
only
ahead and
sort of
mention-
vaguely aware of all of it, so this is kind of a bit all sort of new ground to me anyway. So
Okay, well, since we're talking about Outbreak, a Resident Evil Outbreak remake was on the list of games that they are working on.
oh, I see. I wasn't
Should
be
really
mentioned.
specifically aware of this.
It should
was
be.
dubbed Resident Evil Outbreak J or whatever, something like that.
Right.
Now we don't know what exactly it is, because it was never explicitly confirmed of it being a remake or what, but we
Right.
do know Outbreak of some kind actually does exist. But
It
the question is
could
what it is.
it could even be the Resident Evil Online for all we know, and which would be fantastic, because these days we can do something like that.
I should mention that when it comes to at least that specific one, I know there was some talk about it potentially being a mistranslation. Now, of course, it has been a while, so maybe there was a better translation, but it's kind of confusing because some people say it's Outbreak, some people say it's another thing, some people say nobody knows for sure. The thing
Right.
about these leaks to keep in mind also is that it's missing a lot. It's missing
know.
some games that have already been announced. It's missing, stuff like that. So for those listening, and for those here also, it's one of those things we gotta take with a grain of salt. Would be nice to see though.
Mhm.
Would be really.
This is
nice
one
to
thing to consider too, though, is that the domain for Outbreak. Now, granted, yes, I think it's used for Resistance though, but the fact that domain was reinstated and it's alive could, in theory, be this Outbreak project. But again, it could have been for Resistance. But I'm
Right.
just throwing it
What-
out there.
One of the other ones I wanted to mention back when we were talking about Hunk was that one of the games that is mentioned is a Resident Evil Hank, which is Hunk's first name.
Mm-hmm.
Hank Hunk. Oh, it's not
Yep.
Hank Hunk, is it? But
See, that was another one that I was pretty sure somebody clarified and did say that was another mistranslation where it did
well,
actually.
Well, no,
Hunk's
I mean-
Hunk's just a code name, isn't it? It's just
Yeah.
his It's not.
It
his-
was
anything
supposed.
to do
It
with
was
his
supposed to
actual
be like it is supposed to have like his code name, like it's supposed to be called.
name. Yeah,
Resident
like
Evil. Yeah.
Ghost or or whatever, or Conrad.
Yo, imagine if it
or
was
whatever
called
else.
Hank though. Imagine like walking by on like a in a GameStop
Well, I mean-
and like seeing a game case called Resident Evil Hank.
I mean, that would catch my eye, not for the best, not for the right
If,
reason.
if I'm gonna be honest though, if I saw that and then it turned out to be the story of Hunk, oh, you get my money hands down.
I feel
Mhm.
like for like the average person though, I think like Hunk, like the Resident Evil Hunk title would probably stand out a bit, like because they could do like
Yeah.
a cover art and all that. Like you'd see that, and like they could do like a sick logo and stuff like that, and you'd like see that, and you'd be like, oh, Hunk, yeah, you know, especially since Remake 2 it was very popular.
Right.
And, you know, most people probably played
I-
Force Survivor. But imagine if
Yeah,
it was Hank. Just imagine though.
No, but for sure, for real though, if they did a Resident Evil Hunk, if that leak is true, coming off of the success of Resident Evil 2 remake, that's actually very smart on Capcom's end.
hmm
And
I
I'd
agree.
be excited for it because there's a lot of stuff that Hunk has been involved in that they haven't really explored.
Yeah, it has
Hmm.
potential for sure.
I think.
Yeah, because I mean,
go on.
no, I was gonna say that I think the last time that we heard about Hunk in the actual storyline was Rockford Island.
Yeah, that was Code Veronica. Yes.
Yeah. I think that was the last time that we really heard anything about Hunk. But other than that,
I thought there was something in Umbrella Corps about him. For
oh,
some
I didn't play
reason.
Umbrella Corps, so I don't know that about that one. But
Yeah,
No,
no,
it's actually a point. Yeah, I believe because some parts of Umbrella Corps are canon. I believe the at least the inference is Hunk sort of basically kind of obviously when Umbrella went down, obviously he continued sort of his mercenary ways, and he basically sort of set up his own mercenary organization, which I believe is meant to be one of the organizations that are featured in Umbrella Corps. I believe he's meant to actually be basically controlling one of them.
yeah, there was that. I mean, whether it will come up in canon is up in the air because you know Umbrella Corps kind of didn't exactly do too well, but we'll see. But
Yeah.
yeah, there was that.
I think my worry, if there is an Outbreak 3 and they're actually considering doing it, is that they're under a bit of pressure. And also the fact like they're not going to get a second chance at this. They've kind of done almost everything else except an Outbreak File 2 between Umbrella Corps and Raccoon City and Resistance. They've kind of tried and done sort of every other thing other than an Outbreak remake. Now that's a conscious choice because they know they could have done it, but they've decided not to.
In a way,
Um,
it's kind of their fault too, because not only for like the spin-off things, like with the experiment with other stuff, like it isn't successful. On top of that, though, we got to take into account of Resident Evil 3 remake. You know, people are now skeptical of Capcom remakes now, so they got like pretty much prove people wrong.
Two people were skeptical of. I think to a wide enough audience, the game was good enough that it was fine. Although there were issues to be had, but the game as a whole had enough positives to kind of overlook those. Those same sort of negatives were there in 3 when the positives weren't quite there, and thus the game got sort of a bit bandied about for that. But the danger is with an Outbreak remake is that there are going to be people around who are going to be fairly opinionated about how an Outbreak remake should be done.
Mhm.
The ultimate reality is that there is no one way to do it. There are some different avenues that you could explore. I would argue one of which they did explore with Resistance. Ultimately, though, Capcom have not got a great track record with doing this sort of thing, and that comes with its own areas. Do they try and do it in house again? Do they try and ask another company to do one of these side games? How much do they commit to it? How much money and effort do they put behind the company to get it done? And ultimately, if they do an Outbreak File 3 and it's not very good, then you know, to a lot of the sort of the hardcore base and sort of people that have been fans of the series for a while who know more about it than say your casual gamers, they're going to be a lot more offended than just your generous person down the street who played Remake 2 because they saw a load of ads for it and it looked pretty good and enjoyed the game. You know, so it's a different kind of base they're targeting. This is a File 3 is not going to be a game specifically for just general people to blast on. It's going to be ultimately one that's going to be more directed, either intentionally or not, towards people that are fans of the series already. I don't think it's going to get a lot of mainstream appeal. And obviously, with that means that people are going to be a lot more critical probably of the game than they would do normally as well. So it's a very tricky ground that they're embarking upon if they are going to do it. Of course, I want them to do it and to do it incredibly well, but the track record is running against them, and that is something that does need to be concerned of.
My 2 cents on the matter is it should be developed in-house so that we have quality control. But then hire an outside party to handle the servers and everything to keep it running, but you have to push constant updates for it. Keep it live. It would have to be a sort of MMO style online game where you are trying to survive as Raccoon City. Instead of playing as one of the characters, have it be create your own character, but still have the other characters in the game that you can interact with and make those characters canon and give us the stories for them.
Yeah. Well, I think of that. I think of something like, say, like Dead Island, for example, is the impression I sort of get of that sort of game. Whether that would work, I don't know. It's something you'd have to just put together and play around with it. I kind of enjoyed Dead Island for what it was. But I never thought too much of its multiplayer. It was kind of just like multiplayer was single player, but with other people. It needs to be more than just that, I think, realistically. So, it's something that I wouldn't be surprised if they go down that ground because there's clearly a desire for Capcom to do something like this which works. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been on like this fourth attempt with Resistance. They've tried a lot of games in different forms, and none of them have really worked yet. But they've kept trying. Now, whether that's because they just want to make a really good game in that genre, or they just think it's a way to make a shitload of money, is depends what you think. But clearly, there is a desire to attempt to do that and not just make single player standoffs. They see the business in doing it and doing it well. So it doesn't shock me if they are, but it's hard not to be a little bit anxious about what they might do for it. I would still argue that Resistance shows that there are elements that can definitely work, although Resistance as a whole obviously has not worked. When you drill down into the mechanics of the game, there are some mechanics of it that I think work really well when things were balanced correctly. It's just that the problem with Resistance is that it fell apart very, very quickly on a balance perspective. So simplify the game, and make it obvious what you're trying to do with Outbreak. Don't get too overcomplicated and creative. That's what post-game content and DLC is for. Just get a solid base game working. This is how Dead by Daylight worked. It was not a complicated game when it came out. It was very simple concept. It was simple in execution, and they got that refined to an absolute fucking T. And then they expanded upon it gradually over the course of years of additional characters. If you don't get that core right in the first place, you have no chance. And that has been the problem, I think, with a few games like this that Capcom have ultimately been a part of. I think they've been probably too ambitious for their own good.
Yeah,
All right.
I mean this has been a lot of fun. I have to say, we could go on for hours, but I that would be too much.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know much else to say except we'll keep an eye out for more news. I mean, who knows? Maybe when this 25th anniversary stuff comes out, I mean, if they were to do that and suddenly start something about a potential Outbreak 3, I would be sitting there thinking, holy damn. But they should really get Village done first. I think that's their priority right now.
For sure. All right. I think we should definitely go ahead and wrap this up now because this thing going on a little longer than expected though. But we had some pretty good conversations that probably need
There's
to
some
be
big
said.
topics. There's some big topics to chat about, and some, and it's all fairly relevant. A lot of these price issues that keep cropping up with this series. It happens a lot.
For sure. All right, and that concludes our spoiler stuff though. So I'm gonna get back our main man boss up in here. Hopefully he's there.
Hello.
There you go.
I was summoned.
All right,
back.
we're finished with the spoiler stuff. So I guess now we can do outros.
Yep, we can do outros. So, Mr. Brando, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Mortal Brando. Nothing special. I retweet silly shit, Resident Evil stuff, you name it.
Goetian Games. I'm sorry if I keep getting your name wrong, but
Call him Saitama.
Ocean.
yeah,
Saitama.
Yeah, Saitama works for me.
You
think you
can
should-
find me Goshen Games on YouTube or Twitter.
Awesome.
I think next time I think you should just come on and just call yourself Steve. Can't get that wrong.
Steve.
Steve.
Next we have Black Shadow.
Yeah, you can find me as always youtube.com/blackshadow993, Twitch at black_shadow_993 every Sunday at the moment for pretty much the rest of the year, doing Outbreak streams because I got so many subscriber games given to me over the course of the month of September. It's going to take the rest of the year to complete them all.
So what, a month?
I mean, I've already done like 3 streams and I'm only halfway through them. I got like 30 games of this game to play with double stipulations and my randomizer. It's kind of crazy.
Best of luck to you.
Next up is Harold.
You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Coolmanist, and also on YouTube by the same name.
All right, and since Mr. Dom is here, I'm just gonna plug him. You can find him at biodevil_Dom on Twitter and I assume YouTube as well. You can type that in, you can find him just fine. You can find me at Twitter at RenOperative_. You can find me on YouTube at Renegade Operative and Twitch at Renegade_Operative, where I will be probably trying to get this podcast done as soon as possible for thumbnails and tags and all that, and then probably going to do more Bond Night, maybe Silent Hill or Metal Gear. That's it. When we have more survival horror news, because we are going into December, when they talk more about Village, we will be on it, obviously. We look
update.
Yep, and we look forward to seeing you guys there. So we're gonna end this podcast now, and hopefully you people take care. See ya.
Remember,
TDFNs.
winter is coming.
Oh, for goodness sakes.
There's werewolves. Eat them.
Auga.